And we're live. We are live. Hey folks, welcome to the Q&A with Tony Dae, and also we got DJ from DJ Tutorials. He's here to talk to us about a bunch of stuff. So welcome. Please, as normal, please let me know if the sound's okay. So DJ, if you could also talk so we can hear you
Hey,
to see how this is going.
how's it going?
Get all this stuff set up. So please let us know how the audio is, because if the audio is crap and you can't hear anything, then this won't work.
The audio looks like it's working from what I can tell, I think.
Okay.
We're switched though, which is weird.
What do you mean?
I'm on the left.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
saying. Hold on, maybe I can do something with this here. I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave it. We're just gonna leave it how it is right now.
It's fine with me.
So, cool. Folks, if you could, please let us know if you can hear us and if everything's all right, so we can get this thing going. So just to let you all know, I'm gonna get my phone going here so that I make sure that everything is going okay on our end. And if there's any latency issues, I should see them.
Well, you're checking that? Give me just 1 second. 1 second. I'll be right back.
Oh my gosh, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, just 1 second.
Okay. All right, looks like it's working. Cool, cool, cool. Hey, Motion VFX. Good to see you. Hope you had a good week so far. Hey, J Gomez 72. Welcome. I think that's the first time I've seen you, so welcome to the stream. We're getting everything ready to go. Again, if you're new to the stream, usually within the first 15 minutes to a half hour, we kind of mess around a bit, talk a little bit. Please, if you have any questions, any comments you'd like to put down in the chat, please do so. And if you do, yeah, I know we're mirrored. I didn't fix it, so I'll fix it next time. Promise, I'll fix it next time. Um, hey, Cheap Ass Reviews, good to see you again. If you do have questions, any comments, anything you'd like to say in the chat, please go ahead and do it now. We will get to questions at some point. Today we do have DJ Tutorials here to talk about
I
a few
return.
things. He has returned. Um, so we will do that. DJ, would you like to introduce yourself? Your
Hey.
picture is not showing there, buddy.
Uh-oh. Do I need to come back in?
You just need to put your camera on.
It's
There you
There we
are.
go. That was weird. Um, it's probably gonna blink on and off again. Okay, so yeah, my name is DJ, and I've started a YouTube channel for tutorials on VFX, primarily Blender right now, and I have a background in working in AAA visual effects for film. I also worked in live television. I've worked at a card game company at one point, doing art direction, and I also worked at a design firm doing a lot of simulations, animation, fine art, and now I work at an educational technology company. So that's my background.
Yeah. So you
So I
have
do
a
a lot
lot
of
of
stuff.
experience doing a lot of different things. I mean, when I talk to people on here about the history that I have, it's very much along the same lines. Like a lot of, for me, it's more video production related kinds of things. But when you, especially if you, it seems like if you work in visual effects, you end up kind of dabbling in video in some way in order to expand your skill set.
Yeah, basically
So
multimedia is what I would call myself a multimedia artist, and you kind of have to know everything. you kind of dabble in all sorts of different stuff. Some people are more on the like graphic design end and they do like motion graphics. Some people are more on the CGI end, like myself, with visual effects. And then you get people who are more into the video side of things. So multimedia design is it's a very broad field. And a lot of times it's undervalued, even though it's what's like kind of what a lot of companies need to sort of keep their stuff together as far as marketing materials and things like that.
Well, one of the most important things is logo design.
Yes.
So, I mean, that is huge. You know, that's art is it's one of the most important things that you can do for a business. You know, commercials, advertising, those kinds of things. But we sometimes get the short end of the stick in a lot of ways.
It happens.
Yeah. So yes, cheap ass reviews. We work together. So we've worked together our entire lives actually. So
Yes.
yeah. Um, let's see here. Let me get my notes open. Okay, so we are part of the same movie parties. When I was living in San Diego, we used to have movie nights, and we'd watch mostly like B movies or intentionally bad movies to see if they were so bad they were funny. So now, since there's the distance and everything, I now live in the American South, um, and DJ still lives on the West Coast. We watch movies and stuff remotely, and we saw some movies. And one of the ones that we watched this week is one of my all-time favorite movies, which is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
1990.
Yeah, the 1991, the live action, incredibly
Uh,
violent one.
yes. With what's the name? The guys who did the puppets, Jim Henson.
Yeah,
Jim Henson did
The
the
Henson Creature Shop.
puppets, yeah, and the turtles and the animatronic faces and everything. It's pretty great.
Yeah, it was funny going back through it. By the way, if you want a review of that movie, it's incredible. It's like obviously I was a Ninja Turtles fan when I was a kid, so it's kind of I have bias. However, even if you watch it with the critical eye today, you have to keep in mind the time period that nobody thought that that movie was going to be successful.
It's
Nobody,
very it's very low budget for like you
yeah,
can just kind of see how they did the best they could with the money that they had, and it feels like a movie that should be more expensive than it really is.
yeah. We were talking about it, and I said it was kind of amazing that the movie didn't have any real big name talent in it for the time,
Corey
uh,
Feldman is probably the
except Corey
biggest name
Feldman.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, and he voices Donatello in it, but the rest of them I don't think were uh, any like the guy playing Casey Jones. I couldn't tell you what else he was in. The woman who plays April O'Neil, I couldn't tell you. Most of the voice
Probably
actors,
Jim Henson working on it was probably and the fact that it was Ninja Turtles. Those two things are probably the biggest things that were sold about the film at the
yeah,
time. I don't know because I haven't gone back to look at any of the trailers or anything, but I mean, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was huge because of the cartoon and kids loved it. And I mean, the comics obviously, but the cartoon really uh, made it into like real mainstream. But
yeah,
and then the 90s one is kind of a mixture of the more violent stuff from the comics
yeah.
and the more cartoony stuff from the TV show. So
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because in the TV show, often they don't use their weapons to actually hit the enemies, but
you
then
know
in
who?
the 1990 in the live action 1990s when they actually use their weapons to hit each other,
Yeah.
I was
So
like,
I'm
oh, like Leonardo's actually using the swords. Okay.
yeah. So Kevin Clash, by the way, because Cheap Ass Reviews mentioned Splinter.
Yeah.
Kevin Clash voices Splinter, and he was the voice of Elmo. So
Oh my God.
if you didn't know that, next time you watch the movie, you'll be like, "Oh man, that's Elmo."
Wow.
So yeah.
I think
Also,
somebody
I
had
think the
mentioned that and I don't
turtles.
remember.
I think the turtles when they're babies and they go like pizza, pizza. I think that's also Kevin Clash doing those voices, if I'm not mistaken, because it sounds very Elmo like. So.
Yeah. Okay. That would make sense.
Hmm.
Um, I know that there are
One more thing.
cameos.
One more thing.
Okay.
Uh, it's really funny when the Domino's guy comes in to give the pizza to Michelangelo through the sewer because that's actually the voice actor. So he's technically talking to himself when
Yeah.
he's delivering the pizza. So it's pretty great.
Yeah, I was gonna
It's a
say
wonderful film
there
with all the little things like that.
I was gonna say there's cameos by I think the guy who plays Raphael has a
Mhm.
cameo. The guy who plays
Mhm.
Michelangelo in the cartoon has a cameo. I don't know who else does. But yeah, there's some really good stuff in that. The cinematography is that is if you want to see how to make the rubber suits or whatever they're made out of look right when you're shooting live action, so you don't have to do a bunch of CG and cleanup and all that. Look at this movie because if you notice, especially in the beginning, everything is dark.
Yeah.
It's noirish for a reason because if they didn't do it that way, it wouldn't look as good.
Yeah.
One of my favorite shots in the whole movie is in the very beginning. It's when Raphael is holding up the manhole cover with his sai, and all
Mhm.
you see is his red bandana. When I was a kid, he's my favorite turtle. When I was a kid, I was like, "Oh my god, oh my god, it's happening. It's all happening," because I could see him, but I couldn't really see him. And my second favorite shot of the movie is right when the title of the movie comes out. They jump out from like you just see their shadows and they're like celebrating that they just kicked ass. And they jump out from the shadows and you don't see them yet. The title comes up, and it's like as a kid you have that anticipation, like waiting for them to come in frame, and then they finally come in frame,
Yeah.
and it looks so good. Like if you watched Next Mutation, which was the TV show that was live action, and you compare that to the movie, it's totally different, and it's because of the way it was shot. That
Well,
makes all
but
the
there's
difference.
the next mutation has some hilarious moments, like when I think it's Raphael's on like a bike or something, and
And
the
you
guy
just
in
see
the
the
suit
guy's
can't
face.
see, so they open the mouth all the way up, so you can see like it looks like the turtle's like ah,
Yeah,
and then like you see the guy's head inside. It's pretty great.
it's awesome.
There's some
Uh,
really funny things about that TV show.
To me, that's a so bad it's funny show. I know you guys hated it, but I would play that to get you guys out of the house, like at the end of
Yeah.
movie night. But yeah, it's to me, there's some really funny stuff in that. So yeah, Ninja Turtles, the 1990s one is really awesome, and another one of my favorite things about it is that they took it seriously, and it's kind of annoying when there's like kids will respond when you well they'll respond well when you take a movie seriously as a director. um and for some reason it feels like there's like a cash grab that goes on with these kids show ideas, and then when they put it to a movie they just it's like they don't even think about how to make the characters relatable. They don't think about what the plot's going to be. They don't really think about how they're going to get like a real heart to the movie. And this could have been that. Like they could have just said, "Hey, we're going to throw the turtles on screen. It's going to look like trash. We know that kids are going to go see it because it's the turtles, regardless of what the plot is, and it won't matter." But what's great about this movie is that even when you're older, you can still enjoy it. And like adults will enjoy it too. And I wanted to segue into the other movie that we saw that night, which was Surf Ninjas. That was awful, just awful.
It is really bad, but there is a tie-in because the guy who plays the I can't remember what his name is, but the
Kino,
Kino, he's the
Kino in
pizza
the second
guy in the
Turtles
second.
movie.
Yeah, he's the pizza guy in the second Ninja Turtles movie. Um, but like that movie is like there aren't really very good jokes in it, and that's the hard
Surf
thing about it.
Ninjas?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
there's
like
not
supposed
much
to
good
be
about
like
that.
it's supposed to be like really funny, and I mean there's a different like there's dated humor, like if you watch Wayne's World, which I really love. I watched both of them recently. Some of the jokes are kind of dated and that kind of thing, but it's still fun and it's like a it's funny. But Surf Ninjas is just it's not even a so bad it's good. It's just
It's
bad,
just bad.
bad.
It's just bad.
Yeah.
There,
It
I
looks
I was
cheap.
getting
It looks cheap.
visibly irritated.
Leslie Nielsen doesn't even like bring up the quality of the film. It's just garbage.
I think Leslie
I
Nielsen.
I ended up watching Big Trouble in Little China afterwards just to watch the taste out of my mouth.
I think
I needed something good
I
and
think
something that
Leslie
was going to make
Nielsen
me
shows
laugh.
up for like I think he showed up on set for maybe 2 days. There's the shots inside of the uh cave or whatever that he's hanging out in, and
Yeah,
then
his
there's
lair.
there's the fight that takes place all in the same set. So I imagine that they're all shot on the same day or like right next to each other. Like
Yeah,
the stuff that's in the city, that little city, and then the stuff that's underground. Those were both on just 2 different days, so that's probably how they got them. But yeah, and the acting is just it's just atrocious. It's
it
some of
was
the worst
just
acting I can recall
yeah.
seeing in a movie with a decent budget.
It was just one of the cheapest looking movies, and overall not worth anybody's time.
No.
Even though I've seen it show up on a couple of like group pages that I'm in that talks about like B films and stuff like, oh yeah, you should see this. I'm like, now I
Uh-uh.
know just to stay away.
Uh-uh. It's bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's bad. All right. Um So, a couple things that we're going to talk about today. Uh, we're going to do an overview, very brief and somewhat vague overview of the project that we're working on. Um, and I want DJ to talk about that a little bit because it kind of speaks to the different philosophy that I talk about on this channel on how to get work. That's a bit different than what I usually see when people are talking about how to get work and stuff. So I want to talk about that a bit. The second thing that we're going to talk about, DJ is going to give some advice and some updates on things going on with graphics cards and GPUs and stuff because it's actually really important with like, the Ursa 12K that is coming out, which kind of signifies that there's going to be a lot higher, pixel count cameras that are going to be coming out, which means we're going to need to make sure that we have what we need to deal with it. Um, so it's important to keep up to date on this stuff. It's honestly the computers and the softwares, the hardwares. Well, software I usually know, but hardware stuff, building computers, I don't do that. Like DJ built the computer I'm using, so it's one of the
I
things I need to do better.
I didn't build it. I just picked out all the parts and
You
had
know what I
I
mean?
had somebody else build it
You know what
because
I mean?
I may be good with my hands with digital art and stuff, but I am not dexterous when it comes to anything else in like real life.
What I
So
what I mean
I
is
could not
that
build a computer even if I tried.
by building it, you selected the components. To me,
Yes.
it's very similar. Sorry if you build computers with your hands and you take offense to that. Like maybe there's a big difference that I just don't know. But for me, the really important thing is that first of all, there's a company. If you don't know how to build the stuff, like there's a company that you can get all the stuff through, and that they do a good job, and you have a good warranty and all those things. But DJ understands what's needed to do many different kinds of projects. So if you do have questions for him when it comes to that, please indicate that in the comments so that he can answer. Um, and then the last thing that, well, last thing that I have scheduled, so who knows where it'll go, but which will be a longer discussion, is talking about working with clients and trying to protect yourself from situations where you basically can't run a sustainable business, or you in your job it becomes unsustainable due to usually somebody increasing the scope on you without paying for it, and stuff like that. And there's kind of a bigger discussion because this is actually a huge problem that doesn't just take place at the you know individual contributor um, scale. It's not only from if you're just an editor trying to make money editing and you're by yourself and you're just trying to get clients and all that, but it's even bigger when it comes to studios and all that. They suffer the same problems. So we're gonna talk about that as well. So we'll just do a quick check, see if there's any nagging questions. Long Rider, thank you for the super chat. Thanks, man. That really helps out. that went to the new light mod that I got for 50 bucks that I'm using right now. So thank you so much. Um, yeah, no questions yet. So
I'm gonna respond to cheap ass reviews. I'm already hard on myself with everything I do wrong, and I just know that I'm gonna do a bunch of stuff wrong if I try to build my own computer. Um, but maybe one day. I don't know. I haven't really made that decision. If I feel like hating myself, I might do it, but I don't know.
uh yeah, I have the same problem. There's a few things that I want to do. Like I really wanted to get into doing some leather working, but every time I look at some videos on how to do it, it makes me not want to do it because I know I'm gonna hate my hands
You're
and
talking
get
about
angry.
tooling? Yeah.
Yeah, like I want to do like really intricate designs and stuff, and that
Have you
you
told
need to have a
them
lot of
that the other
patience.
stuff that you knit, so to speak?
Oh no, I was gonna wait for a Halloween episode.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'll
we'll
I'll
wait
do
for
a
that
Halloween
then.
episode so I can show that. That'll be a
Okay.
surprise.
All right, cool.
Yeah, that'll be a surprise. So, cool. Alrighty, so let's get into this. So, DJ, why don't you give us some background on this documentary that we're working on?
So we can't, even though we haven't really been sent over the paperwork yet, it's basically NDA type stuff. So we can't really divulge, information about who the client is and, details. But basically, it's putting together a documentary from a bunch of footage that was shot when making a particular product with a lot of the above the line people at a place that does AAA animated films.
Mhm.
So basically, they need somebody to like put it together, create a story, and create a documentary out of this. And the reason why I was approached on this project is primarily because I know the guy who works at the place where they needed to find somebody to do this. Um, I don't have any documentary editing experience, but this particular person knew that I would know how to get the project done just because I'm involved in multimedia and I've known him for uh what,
I think since freshman
almost
year of
15
college.
years.
So,
Yeah, 15, 16 years, something like
yeah.
that. Um so it half of it was out of necessity, but the other half knew it was like knowing somebody who can actually get this project done and could give it a vision, and he knew that I would be able to do that. So basically me just knowing the person got us the gig.
Hmm.
Um I don't have a website, I don't have a demo reel, I don't have any of that stuff. And often people will just do word of mouth to get me to do projects with them for
Yeah,
contracts.
I
So
mean,
that tends to be the
isn't that how
experience.
you're getting a lot of your other contracts too? Like we worked together on an application
Yep.
that needed to be designed
Right.
and I guess engineered. We you get a lot of different work, like not only for image modeling and like 3D modeling and stuff like that. For maybe you can explain that a little bit too, like the other kind of stuff you do and how you get the work for that.
Yeah, so I worked at a design firm that did basically art and sculpture, stuff like that for hospitality. So hospitals, uh, hotels, boutique hotels, public spaces, multifamily units like apartment buildings, stuff like that, upscale places. So I worked there for a bit and I was working with them on some digital content. And then I switched to a different job, and they wanted to continue working on all this other stuff because it was something that nobody else had. And one of them was utilizing augmented reality in a way that nobody else really did it before. And also creating things like simulations and animated artwork in public spaces at a large degree. So things like gigantic LED panels inside of buildings, and some of them are actually outdoor that I've been working on. There's also uh, like doing visualizations of sculpture projects to be inside of buildings.
Hmm.
So if they were designing like a big red bear, for example, they want to see what that might look like, what it would look like inside of the place versus not at all, or just these sketches that usually a company will do. They don't really make these renderings, and the renderings are what really helps sell the idea,
Hmm.
because a lot of clients have a hard time visualizing a concept.
They do, and it's interesting, I think, how it's gone for what you're doing, because it didn't it used to be where people just kind of like draw it up, and then you'd have to, because when you're talking about visualizing it, this is key, because a lot of times a client will not know what you're talking about as an artist. You'll say, "Oh, it's going to look like this. Here's how we're going
Yep.
to model it." You'll write down like the dimensions, and they don't understand what that means.
Right. They
Um,
even if you give like a storyboard, or you do something like that, it's hard for them to in their mind imagine what that would look like.
mhm,
For example, I had a request to do some storyboard work, which was kind of like pre-production on a larger project that was for I don't really know what the company was for, because sometimes I get the names and sometimes I don't.
mhm.
But they wanted a simulation of glass being blown and created into all these shapes and stuff. So I spent quite a few hours like developing that concept with fluid simulations and animations of different shaders to make it look like molten glass into a cooled glass and stuff like that. And then they found out that that's not what they wanted. So we had to go over to a different one. And just this is a little weird anecdote that I want people to be aware of, because sometimes these are the reasons why we don't get projects. And by we, I mean just multimedia artists. Um, the the client said, "Well, we what we really want is just like the molten glass part. We just want the that effect, like the fluid animation looking like molten glass." So I went ahead and I made a simulation of that, and it looked really cool. But in the meetings, the third party that was supposed to be the one that sent out they were the vendor providing the LED panels and everything. They didn't show up, and so the client said, "Screw it, we're not going to do this project now." So I lost out on a very hefty, as far as my take on it. I unfortunately, I didn't get that project, and that was a really big project for me. So I did get paid for the previs stuff, because I actually charge my clients for
Yep.
doing that kind of thing instead of waiting to see if I get it. Um, so I did get paid for some of that, but the ending animation would have been awesome, and it would have paid a good amount for me. So I was bummed out about that.
That's actually really important to talk about, the what you just said, for the, you call it the previs, was short for pre-visualization, is that right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah, or pre-production, or whatever you want to call
yeah,
it.
can you explain what that is? Because
So
I have something to say about that, but I want to make sure people understand what you mean.
I'm using it a little bit loosely, but for me, pre-visualization for like an animation project I'm working on, for example, can cover doing the storyboarding to creating an idea of what it might look like. Because I don't like what I really don't like doing, and this is what I'm asked of a lot, is giving a price and giving a uh, going like I'm for sure going to be able to make this specific thing when I don't even know if I can make it yet. Like
Hmm.
technically you can make anything using CGI software, technically speaking, but it's a question of how much time it's going to take and what the end price is going to be. Like you don't know how long it's going to take to render per frame, depending on how it's shaded, what you have to use, whether using volumetrics, for example. There's all sorts of things. So what I do is I provide a storyboard of what the animation will look like, and I provide some samples of what the actual thing is going to look like, with the storyboard kind of drawn out, and then actual like frame renders of what that area or what that animation might look like. So that's what I mean by pre-visualization, because it will change and it will be adjusted as time goes on, but that's how I really make sure that I'm nailing down the prices. Because if you are $10,000 off on a project because you don't realize that per frame it's going to be 12 minutes per frame because of how you've shaded it, you're going to be in a really tough spot.
Hmm. Hmm. So, why do you charge for that?
because it's work. And a lot of times the client doesn't realize how much work goes into actually developing the concept. And it's wear and tear on my computer, it's wear and tear on my chair, it's time out of my day. And really, when you're trying to develop a very unique concept, you need to be able to charge them for it. Otherwise, all you can give is like very basic generalizations unless you've done a project exactly the same before,
Um,
so
so tell me, is it common to have it where somebody will do a visualization like that? They'll say, um, I don't know who, let's say company A goes to you and they say, hey, we want you to do a mock-up of what you would do if we gave you the contract.
it's actually very common. They do what's called bidding. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if you are a visual effects company and you're bidding to get the next, I don't know, New Line Cinema horror film, and they want to see who wants to do these visual effects for it, they'll do what's called a bidding process, and they'll say, "We need a smoke simulation, we need this," and it has to do something specific. That's why they're bidding it. They don't
Mm-hmm.
care about your demo reel necessarily. The demo reel probably got them to just look at your company at whatever. um, but when you do the bidding process, that's when you basically go, you take use often you'll either take old footage from another film and add stuff to it, what they're asking, or you will get footage from their film that they're working on, just a couple shots or something, and then you'll work those. um, and you provide that free of charge. You can't charge for that because they're usually asking like maybe five or more companies
How
for this sort of stuff.
how common is it? Let's say, you're one of six companies or you're one of six individuals doing a bid for a project, okay? And it's supposed to be some good project that may pay pretty well. How common is it for you to not get the contract and your work that you did for them be used with a cheaper company or
I see
just a
what you're getting
company
at.
where they already knew the heads of that studio
Yeah.
and they were buddies and they say, "Hey, we want you to make it look like this."
Well, that's the thing is when you do free design for people and you're expected to get paid in the end, and at some point they say, "Hey, I don't want to go with you." If you don't have it signed in your contract that they can't just take your work, they're going to do it. But more than that, how would you know that they used it anyway?
Yeah.
So when I was working at this design company for hospitality, they would have clients who would ask them to do multiple iterations of projects, uh, three or four sometimes, and then they just would go cold. They would never contact you again. They wouldn't talk to you, and then you do a Google search of that hotel in like 6 months, and you find out that they have pretty much a one for one of exactly what you did, but they just took your free design that you did, they went somewhere else and said, recreate this. And so basically, as me being an artist working at this design company, I'm like, why are we even doing this? Like, we're
Yeah.
basically giving free work. And the only way that you know how much it is at the end, they had a base price that they always sold everything at. So they could have 15 iterations or three or one, and it would still be the same price, regardless of how much design work went into it.
That's right.
So,
And I wanted you to talk about that because um I need you guys to understand that this is the kind of thing that does happen if you're not careful with your art. So just keep that in mind, um, that your your art is important and it's worth something and people need to pay for it. So uh, if you need to figure out an hourly rate or if you need to figure out a flat rate or you need to figure out some kind of thing to write in your contract, I don't know where all of you live. So I know that there's some people that give legal advice, which I would never do. Um, as far as like specifics as to how your contract should be and all that, that's all going to be dependent on where you are. You know, a contract in California is going to have different things that you need to do to make it valid than in Texas, than in India. So, everything is going to be different as far as that goes, but you need to protect your own work because that really is, I think, the signature that you would have as an artist. If you design something awesome, or let's say you do color grading. Let's say that you're doing color grading and someone says, "Hey, I want you to be a colorist for my project. I want you to bid three different looks for my project." And you do those three looks and they say, "Oh, no thanks." And then they just take your looks and steal them. Well, you know, that sucks. And if you didn't
Yeah,
charge
and
for it, then you
it
don't get
happens all the
anything
time.
for it. You don't
It
even get the
happens
credit
all the
for
time.
that.
Like the it's so cutthroat out there. And the people who are the clients, it's sort of like a trained behavior. Like they're looking out for their best interests, and if you don't get you as the person making the contractor, if you don't get skin in the game, if you don't get them to give you some money up front to do stuff, they can just take their business elsewhere at any time.
Hmm.
And if they that once you get that first, even if it's like a 10% installment, they've already lost money at that point in their mind if they try to go somewhere else. So at least you get something for your time. And even if you miss out on a couple projects because they want you to bid stuff out for free and like do all this extra work for free at the on the front end, and then wait for all of the payment at the end. I mean, some people out there watching this might be full-time contractors. I'm not a full-time contractor by choice. I know people who are though, and they get screwed over all the time. So it behooves you to really take care of yourself and don't fall into that kind of trap.
Yeah, and it's kind of what I make sure to explain to people that if you're going to be a contractor, you need to have more of a business person mindset and less of an artist mindset because I know how a lot of you are, where you're going to say, "I want to." I mean, I just did this recently where I was like, "I want to do the best I can on this project, even if it takes extra sweat and tears and all those things because I want my work to look good." Of course you do. And you also are saying, I want to get this awesome project. If there's a big lucrative contract sitting there and they're asking for me to just do a little bit, all I got to do is design the logo for this can. Or all I've got to do is create a look for this thing that somebody wants, or whatever it is. And you go and you do all that work, and you don't put it in the contract that they can't just basically steal what you did. Someone else is going to get the credit for your stuff.
Yeah.
It'll happen. It'll happen eventually. So just protect yourself.
If I can
Um,
take a quick segue, just because I don't know how long some people are on here for.
uh-huh.
Um, I think it's Jay Gomez or JG Gomez 72. So to answer your question on recommended hardware, um, technically you can kind of use whatever you have as long as it's a computer and not like a phone. But I do have on my channel, I have a whole series on understanding your computer. So there's three parts of that. And then there's another part that says basically, if you watched all of those, I go into detail on like what things you want in your computer. So if you want to take a look at that, you can. And then later when we talk about GPUs, I can kind of delve into a couple of those, you know, more nuances.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the next thing that we have here, I'll just address a few comments and then we'll go on to the next thing, which is to talk about like graphics cards and GPUs and stuff like that. So, let me just respond to a couple things. Right, you did the recommendation. Cheap Ass Review says, I love digging holes, but I'd never do it for free. That's funny because I like digging holes too, but the same thing. I wouldn't do it for free. And that's the thing is that artwork, people treat it because artists are willing to do art for free because we like it. Like if art's one of those fields where you go, I like actually doing what I do for a living. I enjoy creating. drawings, or I enjoy creating logos, or I enjoy creating videos, or whatever it is that you like to do. Or people like, working on set and the whole feel of it, and shooting a movie. Actors especially, oh my God, actors get treated like garbage a lot of the time because that field is so impacted with people willing to act for free that it can be nearly impossible to have a career in it unless you get really, really lucky. So, but that's the thing is, like, if you're somebody doing backbreaking manual labor, it's unlikely that you're going to be willing to do it just for free to someone see if you can do it. That's usually not how it works. I need to get my roof done. Nobody said, "Hey, we'll take off the roof and then we'll hang a few shingles and then you tell us how you like it and then you pick." No, they all come out, they do a bid. They don't do any work other than bidding and saying, "Okay, this is how much this is going to cost." And for us, that would be the same thing. As artists, we look at something and go, "Okay, you want a you want a video, it's going to be 5 minutes long. You want this, I can assume it's going to be this many cuts in it. I can assume if you want us to shoot it, you want it to be on the web, you want to have an HD render of it. I can assume it's going to be this much." But what a lot of times we have to do as artists too is fight with the client or the business or whoever it is saying, "We want some stuff for free. Give it to us, because only then will we even consider having you." And it's just a different thing.
Well, as far
Um,
as this project that we're going to be working on is concerned, the way that the billing is set up is basically there's a rate, you could call it a flat rate. There's a rate, a price, and then it says up to X number of hours. So basically, they can make iterations, they can make different calls, they can whatever it is that they want, they can have that, but it's up to a certain amount of hours.
mhm.
And we will let them know like what the expected hours are going to be and give them a tally on how things are running so that they can make the decisions they need to make. And if they want to do more, that's fine, but it's going to be at the rate of X number of dollars per hour.
Yeah.
So whereas I get it where you don't necessarily want to get stuck in like really weird hourly haggling and stuff like that. To me, it's been the best way for me to keep my client from going overboard because they're literally paying for my time and I get to set my hourly rate.
It keeps, what it does is it helps to keep um the workload down on their end because they actually have something to lose by asking you to basically redo the project. And this
Right.
happens quite often in video. I mean, this just happened. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but just as, just to add on to it, if you're told, okay, well, we want a 2.5 minute spot. Okay, and then you do the storyboard and you've got everything ready. You agree this is what the storyboard's going to be. This is how we're going to move forward. You do an iteration. They want you to not just make a few fixes, not make a few edits. They want you to completely redesign several seconds of the video. That's way more than adjusting a few cuts.
Yeah.
It's way more than that. Or just imagine if you're a color grader and you're in here, they say, okay, we want to go with this look for this scene. And then remember, this is flat rate, so you're not getting paid any extra for your hours. You do the whole scene. You do the whole scene like that, like they wanted. And then they say, you know what? We don't like the Game of Thrones look. We're gonna go with the Sunrise Kingdom look instead. So why don't you just regrade everything? We want it to look like that now. And then you basically do all that work for free now because
Hmm.
there's no way you're really going to make up for that unless you accounted for it in your pricing, which a lot of us just don't do that because it's kind of hard to guess when that will occur.
Yeah.
So to respond, Mission VFX, you said that you never go with hourly rates. That's conflicting with providing value. I'm not sure what you mean, um, because you can. Whose value are you providing? Are you providing value for yourself, or are you providing value for the client? Because they, if they can get as much work out of you as possible without paying for it, they're going to do that a lot of times. So you know, like DJ said, you don't want to haggle over like hourly rates and stuff like that. But what you do want to do is make sure that there's some kind of incentive for them not to make you redo a bunch of stuff. That's the point. Like if you say it's going to be $5,000 flat and I'm going to give you 5 iterations and there's no other strings to it. There's no strings attached. That means that they're going to be able to make you redo your work as much as they want, even when you're not making anything on it. Even if you say, okay, I at first allocated maybe 80 hours to work on this project, but now it's ballooned to 160 because they decided to redo everything. Let's say all you're doing is editing, and they send you all fresh new material. And they say, now we want you to replace all of the edits for the B roll with all this new stuff. If you didn't have that in the contract and you don't have anything that says that they've got to pay for something like that hourly if it goes over a certain amount of hours, you're going to get hurt. So, um, and yes, nothing should be done for free, but when you charge a flat rate and you don't account for it, that kind of thing can happen. Emotion VFX responds, well, a client will never want to pay much. It depends. We
That
get better over
that
years, so we get quicker,
yeah.
so the price value gets lower each time.
This is
Well,
this is why I increased the rates this time from my normal rate to much higher.
yeah, we actually have a higher rate for the project that we're doing than we
Yeah.
normally would do.
Yeah. So I
S-
mean, I think it
So,
depends. It depends on where you're living. It depends on what projects you're trying to get, and it depends on what you're doing.
mhm,
Sometimes if you are incredibly fast and you know what the project is and you know you can get it done in, under 5 hours and you charge $300, hey, if that's gonna be what does it for you, like by all means do it.
mhm,
And everybody should be doing, um, everybody should be charging what they think they deserve, not what they think they'll get from a client.
yeah,
Um, but as far as my experience has been, especially doing stuff with animation and rendering and visual effects and everything else, depending on what they're asking to do and the small changes, there a small change is not necessarily small if it's going to increase a render time per frame by 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. I mean, that's a lot of time extra if you have, a 5 second, 20 second, 1 minute long animation. So
mhm.
it completely depends on what kind of fixes, it depends on the client, and it depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and also like when I do flat rate projects, um, I do put clauses in the contract or the agreement that says, you know, once we agree on a direction and we have our footage, you can't just tell me, um, okay, we want you to shoot a bunch more B-roll and shoot a second interview now for the same video. So you're going to do that and we're not going to pay you. No, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And I know it may sound like I'm kind of giving you extreme scenarios, but I'm really not. People will think that because it only takes them about maybe 20 or 30 minutes to get done with the interview process, that that's how long it takes and it's not a big deal for you to come out and do it. But if you've ever shot an interview before, and especially if you've done it by yourself, you know how long it takes to do it. A 30-minute interview does not take 30 minutes to set up. You got to drive there, you got to find you got to find where to unload. You have to unpack. You have to send everything to where it needs to go. You have to find all your power. You have to park your car. You have to get up into the building. You have to unpack your gear. You have to set up the rig if you don't have one of those like doctor bag things where like the camera's all set up and ready to go. I don't have one of those, so I make sure to put certain things on it that I know I'm going to need. Um, Getting the lighting right can take a long time sometimes depending on what's going on in the room you have, and especially if you don't have a lot of time to scout it out and look at it, because that all takes more time, costs more money as well. They don't the client often just does not know all of those other costs that go into it, but you do. So it's just important for you, and I'm still having to do it better myself, but it's very difficult it's very difficult sometimes to try to press your interests into the project when you are reliant on that client's money. So it's hard, and I get what you're saying. It's just, I don't know how you do it, but regardless of how you're pricing out your projects, you need to account for if you have a client that will screw you without a second thought and not even know that they're doing it to you.
Yeah.
So,
It's not
that's what
about
we're trying to
intention. It's
say.
just about what happens, and
It's the
that's why
results.
I went and I gave a talk to students at a university, and um, I told them straight up, like, don't ever give a client 100%. You meet their expectations and a little bit higher.
Hmm.
Just barely exceed those expectations. Don't put your all in. Don't, you shouldn't be sweating at the end. Like, it should be it you need to do just enough to give them what they wanted and a little bit more just to make them really happy.
If
But if you
they,
set the
yeah,
expectation that you're going to put in 110, 150%, make this amazing thing, then they're going to expect that next time.
they're gonna expect it every
And if
time.
they talk to somebody else and they're like, "Oh, use this guy because look how great this stuff is," and it's like, "Well, I only did that for their project at that price. I'm not going to, so it starts this whole issue. So if you meet their expectations just above it and you give them what they asked for and at the price that they're willing to pay, that you did your job,
Hmm.
and you shouldn't feel the need to do anything more than that. If you want to do your own projects and give like 150% like I do on some of my stuff where I do like creature designs and stuff, by all means, like spend all your time on that because that's more worth it to you. But for a client who's not going to pay for it, they're not going to know what the difference is between you working really, really hard versus you working just enough to give them what they want. A lot of times they don't know what the difference is. So
Hmm.
it's kind of a wasted effort.
Yeah. Emotion VFX Response just had that with the music video, had a story laid out. Now they came and wanted the day scenes during the night because they want you to do for day for night.
Yeah,
Don't
just
do
put a blue filter on it.
don't do that.
Pan's
It'll look
Labyrinth, I
like
believe that
shit.
Pan's Labyrinth has day for night in it.
Most of it looks bad. Even in that, it doesn't look good.
No,
Um,
I last
yeah,
time I saw it, I was like, oh, why are they doing day for night? I don't understand it. It's very
yeah,
strange.
yeah,
I think it was just supposed to make it have that really cool bluish look because that's what a lot of the, I don't know, darker looks are in that movie. But it's just kind of bizarre when you watch it. You go,
yeah, yeah.
Guillermo del Toro, what are you doing?
Chibas Review says had that happen with the B-roll. Had to explain that a cutesy B-roll cut to music took way longer than the video to cut. Oh yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah. When you have it happen where they want to change stuff out like that, it can be a problem, especially if they're like you go from maybe 10 cuts in a video and then all of a sudden you got to do like 30 and you got to time them all out. Like that's the what I call the talent in editing is you can't really. It's one of those things you can't really teach. Um, it's kind of like how does a director get actors to do what they want and to do it right? That's a talent. It's really hard to teach that. And same thing with editing. Like with editing, getting the timing right takes a long time. And if you're bad at it, you're bad at it. If you're good at it, you're good at it. And you will know because everything will feel right, and other people will look at it and say it feels right too. When it doesn't feel right, they know. So, okay, let's have you talk about this graphics cards and GPUs thing.
Yeah. So the reason why I want to bring this up is because I don't know if anybody is aware, but your GPU and your CPU are arguably some of the most important things as far as when it comes to rendering and previewing stuff and all of that, whether you're editing or creating CGI elements or whatever. And somebody left a message on my page or on my channel. They're like, "Hey, I have this card, which happened to be an AMD RX 580." And they're like, it's really slow and it doesn't really work well. So, I have like $400 to $500. What do you recommend buying? And I don't want to get too mired in like in the weeds and all that other kind of stuff or all that. It's just like components. It's very specific to how much money you have and what you're willing to pay for it and what you need it for. But I just wanted to touch on this particular person's comment. I don't have it up right now, but basically, that card is still a very good card to use. And especially if you have what's called the 8 GB of VRAM, or the video random access memory that's in the card, it's actually a decent card to have, especially if you're kind of like a beginner, and even like if you're doing some professional work, as long as it's not
Hmm.
super heavy. Um, but I want to let everyone know that if you are considering buying video cards, you really have to think about a couple things, like features that those specific cards have. For example, as Tony has pointed out on his channel, NVIDIA has a specific encoder for denoising and stuff like that with Blackmagic design. And that might have something to do with the fact that they have tensor cores, which are AI related components inside of their graphics cards. That helps with that. I'm not really sure, but if you're thinking about buying, you got to like think about those specific things. And the other thing is, and you'll have to do a little bit of research, but at the end of the year, this year, Intel, I think, is supposed to be coming out with their first graphics card in a long time, like a what's called the discrete graphics card, which is the big ones that you see. I think they're supposed to come out later this year, but it might be next year. But definitely NVIDIA and AMD are coming out with new technology this year, um, that are brand new generations of technology inside those cards. So if you're planning on buying a graphics card, I would recommend that you wait until fourth quarter after those graphics cards are released, because all of them, the ones right now that are available, whether you want them or not, I don't know, but they're all going to be a lot cheaper because the next gen stuff is supposed to be way better than what we currently have. But if you can't afford that and you don't need it, if you want to buy the stuff that's available now, or even the older, like the 1080 Ti or something like that, because that's what you want, give it a little bit longer. Wait till the end of this year, and you're going to see a huge price drop in all of those other video cards.
Hmm.
Or if you wanted the brand new stuff, don't get the current ones. Wait until the stuff at the end of the year, because you're going to be much happier. Everything's going to have higher VRAM. The amount of transistors and cores that are inside of them are going to be a lot more. They're going to be more efficient. They're going to use generally less wattage for how much power, like how much usage you get out of it, all that kind of stuff. So if you are like thinking about buying and you can wait until the end of the year.
Yeah, I'm glad you're talking about that because I did ask you, I think it was like a few weeks ago about that because I do want to upgrade my GPU and the that is really important to know because from what you were telling me and what you're telling everybody else now is that these older cards that like 1080 Ti is pretty good. Like it is a pretty good GPU.
Yeah.
I know some people, what is it, the RTX 2080?
The RTX 2080 Ti is
Um,
ridiculously expensive.
yeah, for what it is, especially. And
It's one of the best cards you can get, but it's also like $1,500 for like the
yeah,
base model, and it goes up from there. So
yeah, yeah. So waiting is going to be really helpful for me because I don't need that much of a kick on my GPU. I just want a little bit more juice. So, and unfortunately, I know you had talked about Radeon creating some really good GPUs that for the price can be better than NVIDIA. But the problem is, unless somebody knows something I don't, you cannot enable the NVIDIA encoder with a Radeon
yeah,
GPU
what I
in
would recommend
Resolve. And
doing,
well, hold on.
yeah,
And after using the NVIDIA encoder, I'm not going back to native. There is a big difference between the two. The NVIDIA encoder looks a lot more like what I see in my. I'm getting a thunderstorm now, so if something happens, there's a thunderstorm evidently. Um, anyway, the NVIDIA encoder will encode the video to look a lot more like what I actually see in the grade,
Mhm.
but you'll probably notice this if you used Resolve to render H.264. When you use the native encoder, it smudges a lot of the very, very fine details, especially if you add film grain, it smudges that a bit. So I'm not going back to the native encoder. We are going to be sticking with the NVIDIA encoder unless there is some other way of doing it.
Yeah. what I would recommend doing is actually reaching out to Blackmagic Design and see if they have any of that in, like, if they are considering doing something like that with AMD. The reason why I'm saying that is because Apple does not use NVIDIA. It can't. It cannot use those cards. It only uses OpenCL and Metal.
Mm,
And they're trying to develop their own GPUs, but for the time being, and for a lot of people, they're going to end up using AMD GPUs. They have the biggest GPU that's available is the dual one that's like 32 gigabytes of VRAM in there. So in their Mac Pros that are like $35,000 or whatever. So um, it does not make sense to me that they wouldn't have it at least in the pipeline, that they're trying to get that in there. The only thing that I could see is the issue is that it is piggybacking off of that AI thing, but the
mm,
1070 doesn't have AI cores, so, or the tensor cores. So I don't know. I don't necessarily know, but I would just check first before you make a decision.
okay.
Because when these new cards come out, there's a lot of, like, people who are trying to like rub the crystal ball and like see what's all going to be available. But it's anybody's game right now. Xbox and PlayStation both went with AMD because of the new technology, the new generation of design that they did. So you get a lot of bang for your buck in a relatively cheap price. I have two Radeon 7s in mine, and they were discontinued like the same year, I think, that they
Hmm.
were developed. And now they're selling pro versions of the two cards that I have in there with just a little tweak, and they're selling those for $1,800. And online on like eBay, these cards used are going for like either the same price or up to $1,200 or $1,500 for these cards. So you never know if you're going to get like a really really nice thing from AMD. So I would just do that little bit of research, check with Blackmagic Design, and see if they're planning on introducing that node or whatever it is that they developed for NVIDIA. If not, it makes perfect sense that you would go with NVIDIA. You're just going to have to usually pay a lot more for one.
Yeah, it's not a node, just in case you're following along. If you have an NVIDIA card and you haven't been using the NVIDIA encoder, what are you doing? Do it. Use the NVIDIA encoder first of all. But you do it in the render tab in Resolve. Uh, so yeah,
No, the client won't need that same card.
let me just read
That's
the
for.
question out loud
Oh,
real quick.
sorry.
Cheap Ass Review says, do you guys know when you use hardware accelerated encoding, NVEC or whatever? Does that change how it's read when it's decoded? Like if I render something for client H.264 with GPU acceleration, will client need that card too? No. When you render an MP4 or H.264, whatever, it's the same thing. It's just a different way of doing it. It's a different way of encoding it. The decoders will still know what it is. The interesting thing, though, with what you're talking about as far as the encoding is sometimes the file that you create, if you have in Resolve, you have the your timeline color space is set to certain things. The tag will tell the decoder that it's the wrong color space. For example, if you let's say you graded in your timeline color space of Rec 2020, when they play back their H.264 file, it will read it as a Rec 2020 and it'll look wrong. So you have to change the tags in the color space in order to fix it. But that, again, that's in the encoding process and just doing those things correctly. Uh, so, short answer, no. Um, okay. So, was there anything else on graphics cards that you wanted to talk
Um,
about?
I don't think so. I really just wanted to mention that to people. And if you are considering, just one last thing for anybody who is considering it, look inside your computer case and see if on your motherboard you have another slot for a 16 pin, which is it's the long slot. Um, See if you have another slot for that, to put another, like, what's called a dual width, which are the bigger graphics cards. Because instead of buying another one to replace what you have, you might want to just buy another card to put in there, so that you have two GPUs working at the same time, instead of just swapping one out and then you have a, let's say, a 1070 that you don't know what to do with, and you're just gonna, either
Mm-hmm.
bin it or, sell it online or something, which can be tricky. Um, the person who asked me on my channel about this, the motherboard he had, you could put another GPU in there. So I'm like, well, if you already have an AMD card, you should buy another AMD card so that when you're rendering in Blender specifically, you can use both at the same time for the tile-based rendering system. Um, Otherwise, if you put an NVIDIA card in there, they don't work the same. You can't really, you can switch between the two to use them one at a time and have two different sessions open and render those off separately, but you can't use them at the same time to do a single frame render. So it'd make more sense to just double up on your AMD card so that they can run off that same OpenCL platform. And vice versa, if you have an NVIDIA card, and you could fit another video card in there, you might as well just buy another
Mm-hmm.
NVIDIA so that you can have two of them working at the same time.
Yep. Yep. That's why a lot of people use the dual 1080i's, dual 1080s or dual 1070s instead of getting the 2080 or
Well, the
2070s.
1070 is a fantastic card because it had the 8 GB of VRAM and it was almost as fast as the 1080, not the Ti, but the 1080, and it was a lot cheaper.
Yeah,
And it was
that's what I have.
actually, yeah, the card that you have is what I got when it was during the uh, Bitcoin mining craze. And I got the computer that came with was like $950 or something at the time. That card was selling for almost $1,000 at that time because
Yeah.
people were going nuts buying those 1070s, and
Yep.
somehow I got it in that computer, um, and it was like less than what the card was actually worth. So yeah, there was a time there where you could not buy a 1070 or a
Yeah.
1070 Ti. You could not buy them for a long time.
All right, let's check in here. Not a whole lot of questions today, which is interesting. Please, if you have questions, this is a Q&A portion. Please um, ask whatever questions you got. If it's, we got DJ on here, so if you got things about computers, you got things about uh,
CGI
digital
graphics,
art,
digital
yeah,
art
CGI
modeling.
graphics, stuff like that. Please ask those questions. If you have questions for me, which is mostly video production related, please let me know, including color grading, editing, shooting, whatever. Um, so yeah, we will look at the notes. Okay. So we did already kind of talk about this. We kind of like boiled over into it, talking about the previous stuff. But what I would like to talk about is how we can. Well, let's kind of define what it is to go over budget, or I guess in the education field they're calling it scope creep, which is weird. Which scope usually is the basic idea of how big a project's going to be. There's the scope difference between a commercial for a local pest control company where you just interview, a couple people and shoot some B-roll is a completely different scope than, say, a feature film with, top talent and all that kind of stuff, right? The scopes are totally different. So, when we talk about like the scope increasing and going over budget and those kinds of issues, um, I kind of want to talk about that because, again, it's something that we deal with a lot. And I just had to deal with that in my normal job with a project. And the initial projects were educational videos, and then they wanted to have an advertisement made, which I was okay to do. Um, but what had happened was that they we started out. It was basically I had about a week to put together this video when I already had other work. And they kind of surprised us with it. And I said, okay, I'll figure out how to do it. And, I said, these are the these are the milestones for this project. On this day, you need to review this thing and give me an approval so that we can move on to the next step and the next phase, et cetera, et cetera. Well, again, I'm an artist, so I kind of when the other partner in the situation isn't meeting their milestones sometimes, I'll kind of just like go ahead and hope that it's going to be fine because if I don't, I'm going to be behind. The reason I had done that was because I didn't want to deal with not getting it done. And that's annoyingly one of my flaws as in this field is that I will take it personally that I get a project completed and take full responsibility of it, even when something that's going on isn't really my responsibility. So, for example, it was not my responsibility to review the storyboards and approve them on time. That didn't happen, so I went ahead anyway. When I should have probably done was say, okay, we're not going ahead on this project because I'm not going to spend additional hours doing something that you haven't approved yet. We're going to delay it a day, which would have not met, we wouldn't have met the deadline. So, that's the kind of thing that we deal with a lot, especially with rush jobs. Like rush jobs are the worst, and it's why we usually will charge more if you're working as a major business or as a contractor. If somebody wants something rushed, you have to charge more because it's really an inconvenience to you. Um, you can't do your normal pipeline that you've set up for your work schedules, and often you need more calendar days to do it. So, just to help you understand a little bit more before we really get into it and have the discussion, um, for me, even though for me, like doing a video, I can do very, very quickly. If I have all my materials and I have everything approved and I have everything ready to go, like I can knock it out really fast. That's why I do what I do now, because I can get things done so quickly. But when I don't have enough calendar days, which are different than work hours or work days or man hours or however you want to say it, if you don't have enough calendar days for the stakeholder to review things and to play what I call like idea tennis, where they say we want a video that does this, and you say okay, well how about this, and then they say well how about this, and then you say how about this, and you kind of go back and forth, even though that may take only 5 hours. It can take sometimes up to 2 weeks to do that because you're not your schedule as you the artist, your schedule is not at the top of the mind for your client. They don't really care a lot of times, or they just don't know how important it is to get things over to you quickly. So you need to schedule out all that time. Well, in a rush job like this, we didn't have that time. So as I kind of was trying to just get the project completed, we ended up having to change a bunch of stuff. Even though I would call them up, we'd get it approved over the phone. I didn't get it in writing because I had to get it done immediately. Then they want to change a bunch of stuff. So I guess, DJ, since we kind of have that explained, I hope I did a decent job explaining the situation, especially with this one. Um, and I'm sure other people have had the same problems. What is your advice for dealing with that? How do you uh, prevent that? Because I know you're a lot better than I am at, you know, negotiating the no. You say,
Yeah.
you say no, and that it's going to be late in a very diplomatic way to where I haven't seen people get mad at you. And I'm
So
always afraid of doing that. So,
it's it's hard because you don't necessarily want to say no, you want them to say no. That's the trick. And what it can be is something like this, let's say you've already done two iterations and they just keep this they keep this they seem to keep giving you feedback. uh, what you do is this: you say, please provide all final feedback here because uh, I have enough time to do one more edit before this project is due. So please provide me all of the remaining feedback by X day, so that we can get this project wrapped up. That gives them it puts it on them to give you all the feedback, and it sets a clear boundary where you're going to give them one more chance. You've already done two. First time, you give me stuff, I made some mistakes. Second time, I may have misunderstood what you asked me to do. So that third time should be everything's done. You should have all, at that point, everything should be finished. And especially if you're at a truncated timeline, or an accelerated timeline, as some people say, you have to set boundaries where they have a limited time to give you feedback in order for the process to be completed. And without that, without giving them that boundary and setting that up ahead of time, they're going to do whatever they want. And if they do come back with more fixes after that, you can say, okay, I can do these fixes for you and it will be done by next Wednesday. Is that going to work for you? Chances are no. And then you could say, okay, well, you know, as mentioned previously, we only had enough time to do this last iteration. Unfortunately, this is what we have for now. Is there something that we can work on for the future? Can we maybe update this at a later time? Something like that, because you, by allowing the client to kind of run over you, you're creating a situation where you're going to have to keep reworking it, because often it's because they did not have in their mind what they wanted when they started the project. And that's not really your fault as the creator, that's more on them. So often the tactic or the technique that I do is I don't really tell them no, because nobody likes that. I just provide them the situation. You know, I'll say something like, for example, I was working on an interactive, and after the prototype was approved, we were in the alpha phase. The alpha was sent for review, and they decided to send it to like 5 other people for review at that point instead of the prototype. And even the concept wasn't approved by these 5 other people. And when they sent it to the 5 other people, it basically was a completely different project by that point. And I said, okay, we can do that, but the timeline is going to be extended from this time to this time. And they went, oh, well, let us take a look at it. We'll take a look at these, and we'll like make this a little bit easier. So they went back and they made that decision. Often if you say, okay, well, this is going to extend the timeline, they don't want to do that.
Mm.
Or if you say, okay, well, if you want to do these fixes, we have to do these fixes and move on to the next phase because we don't have the time to do multiple iterations or something like that. So it's kind of like this sort of dance where you have to like work with the client to just get them to get on the same page with you. And the timeline and the due date with the milestones should be the most important thing. And if you do have to renegotiate a contract, fine, that's what needs to happen. Or if you're in a
Mhm.
work setting where there are no contracts, you're just working with somebody who works at the place you're at, you have to renegotiate a different due date. I am not a strong believer in overtime. I do not like overtime. I think that overtime and working extra and stuff like that means that somebody dropped the ball as far as um,
Yes.
when
Usually
they
that's the case. Somebody usually it's whoever's doing the scheduling or it's whoever got the contract in the first place. Usually that's what happens,
right.
but
You if you're working a lot of overtime and you got like a backache and your head hurts and you're frustrated and angry, chances are somebody, whether it was you or whether it was a client, didn't really understand what the project was
mhm.
when they decided to do it, and that's why you're in the position that you're in. So
Yeah.
it can be a learning experience, but you know, for the example that you were talking about that you went through, I told you when you were still doing edits on, I think it was Friday, I was like, I would have told them on Wednesday, I'm only doing one more iteration because that is what we need to do to get this done on time. So give me all your feedback by end of business day today, and the next cut is the final.
Yeah.
Period. I mean, that's just what it is.
Yeah.
And when you allow a client to sort of run away with it, then you get a situation where you're just frustrated, your neck starts to hurt a bit, your butt aches because you've been sitting too long, and you're just kind of fed up with it, and by the end you don't even want to look at the end project. Like
Yeah.
I'm like that half the time. I'm like, I don't even want to look at this anymore because I've spent too long looking at it.
Yeah,
So
and that actually kind of occurred in this situation because a lot of the edits that they were asking for were um like, we whenever we do videos, whenever I do anything, I want to make sure that it does whatever the thing is supposed to do, okay? If you're putting text on screen, the way that the news uses the screen for information is wrong for giving you information. It distracts you because there's someone talking, you got a scroller, you've got, a headline, you have a bunch of information usually on the right or the left of whoever's talking, especially when there's multiple people on screen and everybody's yelling at each other because it's a political thing, and then they show you charts with information that you don't have enough time to process. That doesn't help anybody. All it does is distract you. It looks entertaining because it's a bunch of things to make you all dazzled, but it doesn't actually feed you information very well. It's a major, major problem. In the case of this video, they had some information that needed to be put down. It's like, hey, you need to register, go here, right? So we put that centered and very stylized as far as the font. It fits the branding for the font. It had a little design, but it was centered and it was made to draw attention to the text because there wasn't a whole lot of time to read it. What they wanted was a complete redesign of a lot of this stuff, and a lot of times it was basically to the detriment of what they were
yeah.
trying to do. But they insisted for us to do it that way. And
Well,
when I ended up having to go like, you know what, screw it, like I have to just do it because they're going to insist on me doing this anyway. When I finished it, you never even see the text.
yeah.
If you watch the video, your eye just goes straight up the page
Hmm.
instead of down, which
Yeah.
is not how it's supposed to be. Because you will never see the important information below that you're supposed to see. You just look up because
Well,
the leading lines go like this.
you kind of had like the unholy grail of clients, like the client issues, because number one, you had a accelerated timeline. Number two, you had the client designer, and anybody who's done design work kind of knows what I'm talking about. It's a person who fancies themselves a person who knows design, and they want to give you the, like, I did a mock-up for you and this is how I want it, and it's awful. It usually sucks, and it's like it's not following visual hierarchy, it's not allowing for the flow of the image or the flow of the text
Hmm.
for this example. um, and they had constant iterations because they didn't really know what they wanted to begin with. So you kind of had like the holy trinity of these like issues, or unholy trinity of these problems. And it was a very difficult client to deal with. But I think that um, part of the problem was that there was no contract with the company that we're talking about. It's There's no
Yeah,
contractual stuff there.
there's like a
You can't just
very
do stuff for
yeah.
these people. So you don't have a contract to point to that says you cannot do this.
Mhm.
This is expected. You cannot request things in this way. Whatever. Um, because otherwise, if it was a contracted person, or you had a contract, you just point to the lines in the contract that say, okay, well, according to line, F2A, uh, you know, this is how it needs to be.
Mhm.
Like three iterations, for the final edit. You're at three. You get This is the last one. I will not do any more for you unless we negotiate extra payment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it was just kind of one of those very difficult situations. But a lot of times it also like I've been able to deal with certain situations that are like quality problems, like when people will be a little bit difficult in regards to the quality that they think you do, and then you have to kind of talk to them about that. I've had to do that a couple times, and sometimes it's where you have like I'm really good at dealing with people who are very aggressive, not assertive. There's a difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness, and some of these people that we have to deal with are very aggressive.
Yes.
Um, it's not just in education or whatever. It's also clients that are in a number of different fields, but sometimes they'll be very aggressive on what they want, and especially if they're taught this mindset of I have to get as much as I can out of every worker, even if it means being a jerk about it. That either the you're either the prey or you're the sheep or the wolf. That's how people kind of look at it. You're either attacking or you're being attacked. So you'll get some people who feel like they have to try to squeeze you for as much as they can. And that's where I usually can deal with it on the front end, but when it's in this situation, it's a little more difficult.
Well, I
Um,
mean, that's a whole can of worms, what you were just talking about there.
yeah, let's take a
But
quick break. We will go over that. I want to get
okay.
to some questions real
Well,
quick.
I wanted to say one thing before we end that part of the conversation.
Okay.
Two things that will help out anybody in a professional like area, whether it's in discussions or sharing ideas or negotiating contracts or whatever. Number one, don't really say no. Don't be the one that tells them no. Make them be the one that has to think, okay, maybe this isn't a good idea. And it
Hmm.
takes time and it takes practice to learn that, but as long as that's in your mind, they will really help you. The second thing is never say blah 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 blah, but never say but, because that's kind of like doing this with your hands and people don't react well to that. Always use and.
Yes.
You know, this is a really great idea and I think we need to take a look at our, budgeting here for time. That's the way to say it, not that's a great idea, but we need to look at our budgeting for time. That makes it sound negative on them that they
Well,
had a
it
bad
makes it sound
idea.
like you don't care
So
about what they're saying.
it has a negative connotation that doesn't help.
Yeah.
So if it may sound, you know, like a dumb thing that it's like this little issue that they're getting lost in words or whatever, but that will help you in negotiating and talking with people because they're not going to have this sort of like negative outlook on what you said.
Yeah, the choice of words and your demeanor is very important. And it's kind of like one of the things I talk about a lot is that your relationships are often more important than even the work you do, because if you have a really good relationship with people, they're going to be willing to take even a gamble on you, even if they haven't really seen much of your work.
Yep. I
Um,
I I was in a pitch meeting with working with a group of lawyers. It was a documentary series concept, and and it was a lawyer firm. It was a law firm, and a bunch of lawyers, and it ended up going really well because I used techniques in negotiation and discussion to, if you don't know the answer of something, you say, I will try and find that answer as soon as I can once we're done
mhm.
with this meeting. Not, I don't know. All sorts of things like that can really help you out. And that was really a big sort of like test for me and how I can discuss these things with people because I mean these guys were looking at the contract like super close and there was like six lawyers in that room. So it was like learning those sort of tactics are really helpful.
Yeah, and just I'll piggyback on that, and then we'll get to some questions here. But the big thing uh, for me in that is, um, oh my God, did it just go away in my brains? I think I
I don't
just
know.
lost it. Well, the very important thing that I think is so important, I was going to say it, I forgot. So maybe I'll remember. That's how my brain works sometimes, because I looked at the questions in here and then my brain decided whatever information was in there, it didn't matter anymore. So let's just go up here. Maybe I'll remember, and we'll answer some questions. So let's see. Okay, answer that one. Okay, Ankar asks, "Hi, hope all is well. I often get GPU memory is full in Resolve when rendering 4K, not when editing. Is there a way to get around this? I have a GTX 1660 Ti and I know 8 gigabytes is ideal for 4K." It depends on what you mean for ideal, because playing something back and then doing a bunch of compositing in 4K is a totally different animal. Um, so it depends. You can composite in 4K with 8 gigs and it just completely not work. And then you can use 16s and it sometimes won't work. It all is dependent on what you're doing. There's no ideal for that stuff. And in Resolve, the way that the grading works is very much like compositing, because especially if you're doing keying and doing all those kinds of things in it, you're using a lot of your hardware to make all that work and to play it back in real time, especially. So I think I saw in there that you were doing your grades and all that and doing editing in HD, and then you switch over to 4K. Well, if you do that, you don't know how much power you really need to do the kind of grading that you're doing, because you're kind of tricking the system, if that makes sense. Like you're having it run faster, but when it comes down time for the render, you're gonna get hit with that bottleneck. Okay. So what I recommend is find out what your limitations are, because depending on how you're grading, you're gonna hit a wall. Like if you do the way that they test the speeds of GPUs in Resolve is they will throw down a bunch of temporal noise reduction nodes and see how powerful they can get, how long it can last, those kinds of things until you get a problem with it. So it just depends, dude. So editing in 4K and color grading in 4K totally different. I can do, for example, just like last thing on this, okay? Just so you fully understand what I'm saying. If you do a temporal noise reduction and you try to play back in real time, it's going to be a lot slower than if it's not there. Okay. So you need to just find out what your limitations are. And often the case is if you have a certain way that you're doing your grades, uh, and you're trying to do it all at once like that, if you want to keep that way of doing your pipeline, and there's no tricks that you know of. I don't know what the trick would be off the top of my head to deal with the problem that you're having. But if there's no tricks, then the answer is to get a better GPU or you change your pipeline. Those are really going to be the two things.
I
Um,
also have a thing to
yeah, go
mention on
ahead.
this when you're done. The other thing is, and this is what I would I really do recommend this for anybody. You really do kind of need to know your computer and know what it's doing at any given time. There may be some settings on your GPU or your CPU in general that is reducing the actual overall speed of your computer. So, learning ways to optimize Windows or Apple or whatever it is that you're using helps. I recommend look you could do like a Google search for it, OCCT5. At least that's the one I have. It's a monitoring software that you can actually test and monitor your CPU, GPU, your RAM speeds, all that kind of stuff. And when you start running into these issues, you can actually watch your GPU, your CPU, and everything else. Look at thermals. You can look at if your VRAM is getting full and then not dumping the cache, which actually was happening with an issue that I was having with the render engine that I was using. There's all sorts of things you can find. You can like start to figure out what the issues are that you're having specific to your computer by using monitoring software like that. So whether you're doing video editing or you're doing CGI or rendering or whatever it is, I always recommend that if you're running into issues, getting some monitoring software like that that's free and just watching how your um, the parts in your computer are working, because that might give you an answer. That's all I had to say about that.
Cool. Yeah, that's all important. Yeah, like you said with the monitoring software, that is really important. I know that one of the things you do is you keep your program manager open all the time.
I like to monitor everything that's going on with my computer, because if any wasted time is that's money. So I like, especially if I'm doing long renders, I want to monitor and see how everything is running, how many frames per second are being rendered, like all that kind of stuff, because that
Yeah.
gives me an idea in my head on whether there's something wrong, if I need to update my drivers, whatever.
Yeah, and on cars, you had mentioned that they could try the Radeon 7 or some other GPUs. and Ankar had said, yes, Radeon 7 is indeed a beast, but the price is also a beauty out of budget at the moment. Um, I want to say that in order to do higher end work, you need to pay for the things you need. So, the tools that are going to be required if you're doing compositing, if you're doing color grading, and you're doing 4K, you need to spend the money that's needed on those products. I'm not going to tell you, buy whatever the new 20, what would you see, Dan? A $25,000 used Apple
No, it
computer?
was a refurbished Mac Pro for 34K.
I'm not going to tell you to do that. That's not going to be necessary, but there are certain things that you're going to need to spend money on, and getting good GPUs, despite I forget who it was who was telling me that GPUs have nothing to do with how Resolve, does the work. Um, you do need to spend the money on the components that you need to do the work properly, and to make sure that you're not spending time having to worry about what you're dealing with, because that's all going to hurt you.
Yeah.
If you're doing actual paid work, um, the time that you're spending having to troubleshoot and work around that problem would be solved by just spending the money that you need to spend to get it done right. Um, so,
Yeah,
if your client can't afford to have your work in 4K, then just don't work with them. That's
it
that's my
is
opinion.
it is amazing when you start to really dive into all the GPU stuff, looking at like the differences and like render speeds from like the 1660 Ti is actually a very good video card for especially gaming, but like viewport rendering and stuff like that in Blender, it's excellent. Or like development for gaming. But the problem is once you get into that 4K realm, and you can see this, like Blender, for example, is a great way of benchmarking certain GPUs. When you jump from a 1080p or an HD format, and you double that to a 4K, it's like night and day sometimes with video cards just because of
Hmm.
the VRAM. And then when you go even higher to a 6K or 8K, it's like even more. So like one may do like the best ever for 1080 or 2K, and then once you go into 4K, it's almost unusable.
Well,
So
HD
that's unfortunately what can happen with things like the 1660.
HD is a quarter the size of 4K. A quarter. That's why. If it's good for HD, and you can do a few things in 4K, you got to realize that the size of the image in 4K versus HD, it's huge. It really is. It's a huge,
Yeah.
huge difference. Um,
It's the difference for me when a client wants like a 4K render versus a like HD. It's I think I tag on another 40% or 30 to 40% for the render
yeah.
because it takes way longer.
Hmm.
Everything takes longer and it uses a lot more percentage of your all your thermals go up on all your pieces, which means wear and tear on your video card and your CPU and everything else. So,
It also often means you can't do multiple not projects, but jobs at the same time. If you're
mhm,
running a render and you also want to do something else while that render is going, if it's taking that much juice to get the 4K render going, it cuts into your other work. So, yeah, and I'm not trying to be weird about this. I just think that if you are doing work, if it's I'm assuming that if you really need that kind of size of video, and all this is really important, that someone's going to be paying for that. You've got to factor in how much the equipment you need costs. If you're doing, video production, and you're not factoring in the cost of the actual camera that you need, and the lens you need, and the memory cards you need, and the lighting you need, and all those things, and you're having to work around those issues, it's going to be a lot better for you in the short and long run to just charge what it costs and get what you need to get it done. You'll actually save money doing that. Um, there's a question from Choo Choo. Uh, when starting, would you work for free to get your feet wet and build reputation? Mostly, no. And I could go on all day about how much I do not like this kind of thing when people do it. But there are exceptions. So the exception that I have is not to get your feet wet. Okay, you shouldn't work for free to get your feet wet. When somebody apprentices as a pipe fitter, they don't work for free. When somebody is when my first job was working at a pizza place, when I was learning how to answer phones and how to make pizza, I was paid for that, even though I was unskilled labor. Even though it does take skill to make change and all those things, still unskilled labor according to whoever. But um, people who are even apprenticing or learning, they get paid for what they're doing. You can get paid to go to college to learn how to be a research scientist. So when someone's telling you, well, you have to work for free in order to get your feet wet to even have a chance, no, you don't. If you're going to work for free, these are the areas that I think it's okay to work for free in. Number one, for your own personal enrichment. If you want to write a book, and you want to write a book, and it's just for you, so you can get your thoughts down and all that, and that's great. You don't give that book to a publisher for free to make a bunch of money off you. If you want to, make a piece of art and you post it onto Facebook or you post it onto Instagram or wherever it is, so that you say, "Hey, here's my thing I made." Nothing wrong with that. You made a thing. It is true that, Instagram or Facebook or whatever, they'll sell ads whenever, you're using their social media, but I think it's a little different. It's a way for you to show your work, and I think that's okay. Should you give it away to a company to use as an art piece for a magazine for free? No. Um, so I do think, though, that if you do work for free, it should be either some kind of immediate benefit to you, or it's an enriching thing, or it's something that you really believe in. So one of those things is like a nonprofit thing, like a lot of people I know do video production for their churches. I don't do that, but I'm not going to, I understand why they would do something like that, so that people at home can watch the church service and worship and all those kinds of things. I have no, that sounds fine to me. That's how they donate their time. Um, if you're let's say you love dogs and there's an animal sanctuary and they need monthly videos to say, hey, we have these dogs that we need to move, they're looking for homes, and you make little videos for them. That's a way to do it for free. And those are groups that actually need help. They need volunteers. I have no problem with something like that. Those are not companies looking to make a profit off of your art. So I think that there's, when I hear what you're saying, Choo Choo, it sounds like the old, well, I'm gonna go and work on a set for no money thing, and I'll be paid in experience. It's BS. It's BS. Your
Yeah.
work is valuable. That's why they want you there.
The reason why people have unpaid companies, very profitable companies, have unpaid internships is because we are willing to accept that contract. If nobody accepted the contract of doing free work, it wouldn't be a thing. And in other countries, and we're talking about the United States here, in other countries, they don't allow that. It's illegal.
Right.
So, when someone's asking, it's like if you're going to do Photoshop work, clean up stuff because a family member died and it's for their funeral, would you charge like somebody asking you to do that? If it's like your mom or something like that for grandma? No. Like, I would say, of course not. Or a headshot for a really close friend of yours who wants to, go into Hollywood. I don't think that I would charge them. But if your mom or dad was starting a business and they needed logo design, if you're going to accept that work for free, who is benefiting? Are you benefiting? Is the art community benefiting by you taking free work for someone who's trying to start a business where logo design, marketing, advertising is part of the cost of like building a business? like you're basically taking away work from the industry. You're taking away work that could have fed somebody's kids when you do that. So I think these are things that you really have to think about when you're going to accept work, even if it's a friend of yours who's starting their own business. You got to get a cut of that. You got to get a percentage. You got to get ownership of the logo or something. You need to get something out of it in order for, in my opinion, for it to make sense. Or they need to do what a lot of other people do and build capital and pay for the work and the efforts that other people do to help them build their company. Because these will be the same people who, if they do get free labor, will say in 10 years, if the company was successful, how hard they worked.
And that often it's that they did it all themselves too, which I
Right.
really like. I am self-made. Impossible. Impossible to be self-made. Um, the one of the things I wanted to talk about with this, just to drive home this idea, first of all, of unskilled labor, or that if you're doing work that it's okay to not get paid because you don't have a whole lot of experience or you don't think that you're adding value or whatever. I had this conversation with somebody who is basically like an intern for a very uh, well-funded laboratory. They were basically like a not an executive assistant, but like a a lower end assistant. Okay, and they so I was talking to them, and I was like, oh, what do you do? And they're like, oh, well, I'm in college right now. I'm learning to be I'm going to be an MD. I'm going to go to this school. I'm taking the test in a couple months. And I'm like, oh, what do you do? What do you do at the lab? And they said, oh, I'm just I'm an intern and one of those unpaid internships. And I was like, unpaid? What do you mean unpaid? Like, you're at one of the wealthiest universities in the world. How are you an unpaid intern? That doesn't make any sense. And they're like, well, I don't really, I'm there and I'm learning and learning how to do everything. So I benefit. And I said, well, what are you learning to do? And he said, what? I said, what are you learning? What do you do every day that you're learning from? And he was like, he like thought a moment. He's like, well, like I have to like copy papers and I have to sometimes like go get laundry and I have to like, do tasks where
It's
I
so
go,
sad.
I have
I
to
feel
go
bad.
take, sometimes I have to drop off their dog at the,
God damn.
drop off their dog at the groomers or wherever, or call in for like, when there's lunches and stuff. I said, so let me just try to make sure I understand this. Okay. So you don't get paid, but you're being paid in like what you're learning. And you're learning how to take care of someone's dog,
Mm-hmm.
how to do laundry, how to make copies of things. What of those have to do with being an MD? What of those things have to do with being a research person, a research scientist, if that's what you end up doing? He's like, oh, well, uh, I guess none. And I said, yeah, so you're getting paid nothing.
Yeah.
I
They're
guess
they're a
I
personal assistant
Yeah, you're a personal assistant. I said you're a personal assistant,
in free labor.
and I said, so I said, if these things are so, if they're worth $0, if this work is worth zero, then why are you being told to do it? Why would anyone ask you to do this work? I mean, I would expect that if you're being paid $0, and this would happen on sets where I would see that there's what's called a director's assistant, where a lot of times the director's assistant doesn't really do anything. They just stand next to the director and listen to what they're saying, and they'll get them a Coke once in a while, but they're actually learning. Like they get to watch, they don't have to do any labor other than
Yeah.
watch how the director is directing the scene, how they work and all those things. And it's very seldom that they actually do any work at all. And they may not get paid. Sometimes they do get paid. Sometimes they get paid like $250 to $500 a day just to basically sit there and observe. But this person using their own vehicle, mind you, to do these things get paid $0. So, if if someone's asking you to do work, it's worth something. And especially for people who are like heads of stuff, um, every minute that you're doing something like taking care of their dog or whatever, they're not having to do it. And it's worth a lot of money to them because they get paid a lot. That's how much
Yes.
every hour you work doing one of those menial jobs that they don't have to do, that's how much your job is worth. And it can be sometimes up into the tens of thousands per year for something like that, what it's actually worth. So don't let anybody in the art field tell you that you're not worth being paid because your work's not valuable. Even if you're a novice and you've never really, done it before, like your work is valuable. If they're willing to take you for free, there's a reason.
Here's
It's because it's
a thing.
valuable.
A thing that's funny about that is if you actually knew somebody in the media and design world, it wouldn't be a question about doing anything for free. You just have a job like that. So
What? Oh, yeah. You mean if you know people, you're
yeah,
saying like if you know people, yeah, no one's
yeah.
ever going to ask you to work for
In
free. They won't do
my
that.
sophomore year of university, there was a person there who already had a job lined up for her in a very well-to-do design company, and
How'd they get it?
all she had to do was just basically go to school and have her degree, and already had a job waiting for her.
How'd they get the
So
job?
she just knew somebody. She just knew somebody who worked there. It was like their dad's friend's like firm or whatever. And it's like
So
you have to like understand that like people who are actually in it, like they're not doing stuff for free. They're getting paid. So you should too.
yeah,
Anyway,
just if you're asking yourself, should you do work for free? The answer is no. Okay, because what you should do instead of, if it's like a company that let's say, I don't know, chip company A. If you want to do stuff for chip company A, just get to know who the movers and shakers are. Get to know who holds the purse strings. Get to know who is the head of marketing. If you know the head of marketing, dude, they'll bring you in. They'll make up a role for you. If you're
yep.
friends, they'll make up a job for you. That easy, just like that. They'll find a way to get you in, regardless of whether or not they even need you. So that is where if you're, you know, thinking about doing work for free for people in, that they're going to make money off of, don't do it. Just be friends with them. It'll be mutually beneficial.
Hmm.
Um, has anyone experienced Resolve getting slower and slower with each new release? No. I have modern Alienware laptop with M2 drive, 16 gigabytes, 10 CPU. I added 1080 clips. Expressive imagery. If you're having issues, I strongly recommend doing a sweep for bugs or whatever in your system. Open up your console, see what's going on, to see if it actually is slower. Because if your GP, it might be a number of things. If it's an older laptop, I don't know how if GPUs go out or if what the wear and tear is and things like that. But often things like that, it's like over time, your computer is getting slower and slower because there's something going on in there that you need to clean out. That's usually
Yep.
the case that I see.
Temp
Um,
files.
yeah, DJ temp files, caches and stuff like that. That's usually
Yep.
what causes issues like that.
Look up the software called CC Cleaner and run that sucker. I wouldn't necessarily do the registry keys, but run it for everything else.
Yeah, every
There's
week
a free
run that.
version that you can get, and it will clear out all your temp files, your caches, all kinds of stuff, and help keep your computer clean, so you don't have wasted space or
Yeah,
stuff that's cached in a place you don't know where it is. And monitor using OCCT uh, or any other monitoring software. Even if you have Windows, just hitting looking at your with Control Delete, looking at that, um, you know that will help you to see if there's something specifically going wrong.
yeah, that's usually the case I see. It's usually, from my understanding, like the new software, it often optimizes what you have better. It often doesn't run slower unless it's Premiere. Premiere gets stupid. Like Premiere when they created the Creative Cloud, because in the previous versions before Creative Cloud, um, I never had those issues. But once CC came out, then there's like weird things that they do that are not optimized for Windows. But Resolve
Yeah,
tends to
Adobe is a
not
completely different thing.
be like that. I haven't had that issue. Um, Photographic Elements asks, what do you need? Oh,
What do you
sorry. What
send?
do you
Yeah.
send clients before work starts to ensure clear communication and expectations? Sometimes runaway, vague clients don't answer questions needed about a project. What you have to do is set the expectations in writing, and you have to make an agreement and sign a contract before you do any work at all. Unless the only time that I think you can do a good faith start on a project is when you're really good friends with whoever that client is and you know they have money.
Yeah.
Usually that is fine. But you don't go like the whole length of the project and them not signing anything. You go, maybe like a week where you're like right now we're kind of doing that where we're getting the footage and we're kind of giving it a look before we do the signing and everything. Even though we verbally agreed to everything, you want all of that written down in a contract, and you want money in your hand
Yes.
before you begin. And before you turn over anything that's actually valuable, like I think by runaway clients, if you're talking about when you turn over your final and the client doesn't pay you, you make them pay you before you deliver the final. That's the way you
I
deal
think
with
what he
that.
mean I think what he means by
So,
runaway, and correct us if we're wrong. I think what he means is when they keep doing iterations, and they keep giving you like, more and more and more
oh,
and
I
more
see.
notes to keep changing stuff. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, having a set of rules and regulations, and I'm lucky that I have a friend who's a 65-year-old professor, and he's run a couple businesses, and he helped me develop the contract that I use as boilerplate now, but it's very legal in the way that it's written. There's very specific things that say what rules need to be done by each person, like what their responsibilities are, rules and responsibilities. It reads a lot like a lawyery sort of contract. And in the part for you, it should say like what you're responsible for, what your deliverables are, when the final thing needs to be delivered. And in theirs, the client section, it needs to say something like, you know, um, they are required to respond to this thing by 3 days after a submission. They need to provide or turn over all video footage, all imagery, and all ideas by September 13th, 2020, in order to start this project. They need to have it needs to be written very specifically, because if it isn't and you sign something that's vague, then it becomes something where you can
Mm-hmm.
argue one way or another. And if they have more money than you for a lawyer, you ain't going to get jack. And if like you can't afford the arbitrator and they're the one that brings in the arbitrator, chances are the arbitrator is going to be on their side.
Yeah,
And
that's
usually
actually
arbitrators are on the side of a company because they have more money.
yeah.
So you have to be very specific in your verbiage, and you have to say, like in your payments, you have to be like, by this date, like by the signing of the contract within 10 days, there needs to be a payment of X percentage equaling this much money. There needs to be by the 50% mark of when you give them a low res final that's like watermarked or whatever. After that is approved, they need to pay you within 10 days 25% of the final, which is this much. And then when you deliver the final, they have to deliver your final payment, within 10 days of that final. And they are contractually obligated where every section is uh, initialed, and at the bottom it's signed, where there is no question on
Mm-hmm.
whose rule, on what the responsibilities are and what the rules are and the final deliverable is. If on that sheet it says 1080 and in the end they want 4K, they can't have it.
Yeah. Unless they pay you. They'd have to sign a new thing that
Right.
says, if they really want that, let's say they go from HD to 4K, you have them sign a thing that says here is the alteration and what the rules are, and you have to be very
Hmm.
specific. I mean, it's the same thing if you've ever had to work with contractors for working on your home, which is what I'm having to deal with. When there are very specific things written in the contract, not only does the client have rights to, whatever was agreed, but also you as the vendor have rights to whatever was agreed as well. And you will have a case as long as it's written down.
Right.
If you're a contractor without a contract, which is usually where I hear these kinds of issues, that's usually where you come into a problem. And the other time where you do have an issue as a contractor though is when you are contracted by a very powerful company that you didn't know were jerks, and you turned over work that you shouldn't have, and you didn't account for them being jerks. And then what they'll say is, "What are you going to do? Sue us?"
Yeah.
Because they know that it's going to be more expensive for you to try to take them to court, and they will do whatever they can to not be sued. So
Yeah.
if you have it in your contract where, for example, you don't turn over anything that doesn't have a watermark or the timestamp burn-ins, um, if you make it clear that you will not turn over anything that's final until the final payment is made, you will never get screwed over on the
Yeah.
final. You won't get screwed over like that. And after they've already paid, say if there's five um, payments, or if there's four payments, or however many payments you do, you should at least do three. My opinion, at least
Yep.
three. Um,
And hold
uh,
that final.
yeah,
Hold
and
that
and once
final.
it's time for the final, they'll have already said, "Well, I already paid, the other two. I want my final. If we paid for
Hmm.
it, I want the final thing." So, that's how you deal with that kind of client. You deal with them as if you don't trust them.
I have two more things to add. You should always include an escape clause, and I don't mean that weird sequel to the Santa Claus movies. There should be in your contract an escape clause that allows the client to basically, at any point during production, stop down production and leave. In which case, you will owe the client nothing and they will owe you nothing further. Meaning, if they already paid you $1,500 in a deposit, you don't owe that
Yeah.
back. That's yours. And you don't have to give them any other turned over footage as soon as they decide that that's what they want to do is cancel the contract.
Hmm.
So you should have that in there because someone may say, "Well, I was entrapped into this agreement because there is no escape clause and they basically were holding my stuff hostage, whatever." They could say that. The second thing is I actually worked at a place that did what Tony was talking about. I didn't know it at the time, but basically they were lying to the people that they were doing the contracts with. And at all of my time there, only one artist ever redlined a contract and returned it back with payments and different stuff in the contract. The only time that ever happened was one guy, and he had like 9 pieces that I contracted him for, and he at least got paid his first installment on time. The second installment, they always held back more than they were supposed to because that's how the place ran, and I didn't know it. But he at least had the installment payment so that he had some money while he was working on it, and it wasn't going to get stuck in process where it could take like because we were told not to tell artists that it could take anywhere between 6 and 8 weeks for I think it was Marvel to get back or Fox. I can't remember which one. It was either Marvel or Fox to get back on reviews. So they might be expecting that when they send in their final pencils or whatever, that they get paid for that part, not for another like 4, 6, or
Hmm.
8 weeks. And they didn't know.
Right.
So
And because the artist wasn't taking that into account, they ended up getting the one that was screwed.
yeah,
So
if you weren't even
being the
thinking
one
about
that
it,
was
you were
screwed.
just excited because it was Marvel project you were working on or whatever. Like I did a project with Big Trouble in Little China in it. People were excited to do that and didn't read the fine print, and they got screwed in the end.
Yeah,
And it sucks.
the artists like we have to really be careful of that because we will get excited about that. You're like, "Oh, I'm going to work on this really cool IP," and they will feed on your excitement.
Hmm.
I remember when we were working VFX and we started out, it was like, man, we were working on the biggest movies, and we're like, man, this is cool. I don't mind being underpaid. I don't mind working these ridiculous hours, working 80-hour weeks. I don't mind that.
Yep.
I remember when they were working on the Alice project and they would talk about how they wouldn't even go home. They just go to sleep like under their desks, and I was like, "What? You got to be kidding me!"
Mhm.
Um, so the and it's because people get excited, or especially artists are like, "Oh, I'm gonna work on this really cool thing," and you'll get eaten alive if you gotta temper your excitement.
Yep.
I've had to do that a lot because it bit me really hard. Uh, yeah, so put in whatever other questions or comments that you might have. Because we're kind of winding down. Usually we end around 8:30.
Taco Berry is a great name, by the way, because I'm imagining like a little like fruit bush, but they're little tacos, like instead of like blackberries or something. I would grow one of those if that was a real thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a great
That's a
name.
good name. Um, so I kind of wanted to, because we got some time. I wanted to talk about this thing about the killer instinct in business because I hear that a lot. I work on a lot of educational content with even though certain people think that there is no educational content on how to be an entrepreneur or how to start a business. Yeah, there is. There's a lot of it, and it's made not only by smaller groups or individuals, but also by very, very large businesses. So one of the things that is constant is the this idea of using nature to kind of be a symbol of to kind of like symbolize how businesses interact with each other. So I remember one of the things in one of the very recent videos that I worked on where they were saying that basically you're either a lion or you're a gazelle in business. You're either one of those things. Either you're going to eat someone else or you're going to be eaten by someone else, and you have to pace yourself accordingly, depending on what kind of just those two. Those are the only two that you could be. And I was just thinking how unrealistic that is, and how incorrect, in my opinion, that mentality is with most businesses actually, because most of the larger businesses don't work that way. Um, I'd say a lot of the larger ones actually work like a more like a cancer than like a lion. But and what I mean is that they usually acquire more and more things, and they get larger and larger and larger and larger until at some point they break, or they kill it, they kill the entity, or the business just implodes, which is often how it happens. But there's way more than that. Like there's more than just like either you're a wolf or a sheep, or you're either a lion or a gazelle. Um, so I kind of wanted to ask you about that because I thought not only did that paint a pretty grim picture of what it's like, but I also think, like I said, I think it's very unrealistic and wrong, factually wrong in the way that it works.
Well, I think that I mean my knee jerk reaction is like, you have to think about what kind of world there. We talked about this before, coming on here, and I mentioned the fact that in order to like study business, like people read The Art of War, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and I'm like, what kind of world have we created where people think that in order to create a business to sell socks, you have to study ancient ways of like war and like concepts that were designed for like generals and stuff in war. And I just think like the most important thing about any of this is like before getting to into any like scientific whatever is that you have to think about what kind of world you want to live in and what kind of business life you want to have. And it is true that artists, for example, it's highly competitive. It's incredibly competitive to try and be an artist, especially if you're trying to get into a place like Disney or whatever. And you may need to hurdle over some people or push some people down to get there, but in the end, is it worth it? What did you do? Like, what was the wake of disaster you left? Um, and what kind of artist do you then become when that's the way that you get from one place to the other? So, I think that the idea of what success is very debated. Whether it's the amount of money you have or how well you're known or any of that stuff is like highly debated. But I mean, if we just like look at that idea that people are either gazelles or what is it, tigers,
Yeah, I've heard it done a
lions or
couple things.
something.
I've heard it's always an animalistic way of looking at things, which, by the way, human beings are quite a bit different than animals. I don't know if you knew that,
Well,
but human beings have developed parts of their brains that animals don't have. So we are not just meat with eyes. We're not like lizard people.
we're not rawhead Rex.
Okay, we're not. Oh, you know what that's supposed to be, right?
Yes, I know what it's supposed
Okay.
to be.
Okay. Because he ended up making that in, if you guys know what we're talking about, he ended up making the actual Rawhead Rex in
It's very
Hellraiser 2.
cool.
Anyway, the something Saurus. So anyway, what I'm saying is that we're human beings. We're not wolves or lambs. We're not tigers or gazelles. We're human beings. And the way that human beings have been able to do what we have is through cooperation more than anything else. It's cooperatively working together to do things. That's how we do it. In the film industry, the way that we are able to create movies is by having a whole lot of people working together. And for the consumer, it's better that there isn't a bunch of wolves eating all the other companies because when that happens, you're left with basically one kind of product.
Well,
Okay? So it's
here's a very real example of how that sort of mentality will kill an industry. Back in 2008, 2009, and especially 2010, when it really kicked off, 3D conversion was the big thing. TV started to come as 3D movies that you could watch. Theaters were converting to 3D experiences. China still has a really big 3D market, but there were like tons of vendors. There were so many 3D vendors that you could go to and get different ways that they were doing stuff. And over the next 5 years, they basically sued each other and undercut each other to a point where it destroyed the industry. They had really bad quality films coming out, like Clash of the Titans was a very poignant example, and the Star Trek, I think it was Into Darkness, or yeah, I think it was Into Darkness that was converted. Those movies, like, they're so poorly converted and people have such a hard time watching them that it becomes like it's gimmicky and it's like there and then it's gone. It's just a fad instead of being something really amazing, which as a person who worked in it, we could have done some really amazing stuff, but the industry killed itself because they were not producing quality products for people to watch. And instead, they were concerned with who was getting the next project, how much they can undercut somebody or sue them for the technology
yeah.
that they use, which everybody uses pretty much the exact same concept of their technology. And instead of working on making the industry great and making it so that we had really great products, they used this mentality of, attacking each other until it got so bad that they would even put out false press releases before a producer at a company was going to sign the contract with a vendor, just so that if they saw that in the newspapers, they would think twice before giving that project to them. And that actually happened at the company I worked at. The company that was saying they were going to sue us had no claims on anything, and it was only a stunt so that
Hmm.
the film studio would give them the project instead. So now we're at the point where there's basically three vendors for it, and 3D movies are basically dead, and you can't even get a 3D TV anymore. So it's like that sort of thing. Like it's that thing where you have to ask yourself, like, do we want to destroy our industry by doing this to each other?
Well,
Like,
yeah, I mean, basically that's what will end up, occurring because if you're basically telling people that they have to have a kind of like a killer instinct in order to survive in this, thing, that is the end result. That will happen eventually, where you will destroy your own baby. You know, if you create a business and it gets like gigantic, it will implode eventually. It's gonna happen. And again, it one of the biggest problems that I have with it is how the people who are buying the products end up being the ones who lose out the most. Because, if you look at, movie studios, for example, when the movie studios just keep consolidating under one umbrella like that, you basically have one choice. You're going to get the choice of whatever that studio decided to release that year. I can't stand superhero stuff anymore. Can't do it anymore. I won't even entertain a good one right now because I can't stand it. And I used to go to the midnight showings of Spider-Man
And The
and
Dark
the
Knight,
Dark Knight series. I was going to the midnight showings of that.
because they weren't
Um,
around. They were once in a not in a lifetime, but like once in a while they would be a there'd
it
be
would
a
take like three
superhero movie.
years. It would take like 3 years or so to get
Yep.
a new one. And I can't do it anymore. I'm gone because it was people with that mentality. Well, this is making money. Everyone just shoot a bunch of these things out. Same studio shooting the same kind of things out as everybody else. And it really only a couple, like three major studios.
Well, I mean, they are doing well financially. I mean, that's the thing is like pretty much every one of those movies done by Marvel makes a
Yeah.
you know ton of money. But then you get stuff like Venom, which I do recommend watching because it's one of the funniest movies I've seen in a while, and it doesn't really follow anything from the comics, which is funny in itself.
Yeah.
And there's one scene in particular. It's the scene with the lobster tank. One of the funniest things I've ever seen in a movie, unintentionally, I think, but it's pretty
Mm.
great. Just to watch like how quickly a film can get like really 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 bad. Um,
Yeah,
Sorry if
that
anybody
is
liked that movie legitimately. I found it to be rather silly and
that
was
is
not
one that
very
I want
close
to
to the
see.
source material at all.
That is one that I want to
Uh,
see. And I wanted to point out that there are multiple ways that you can set up your business to not work that way. The businesses with that kind of killer instinct are the ones that are willing to do, usually, they're willing to do things that are very unethical in
oh yeah,
order to increase their profits, which is totally not necessary. And it creates often a race to the bottom
one
because
company
you
in particular was bribing executive producers at other companies to give them the work, not because they were beating them out because of the quality and the speed they could do it or the price, just because the executive producer was being literally bribed and it was in the newspapers and apparently nobody
wow.
cared because they still got the projects anyway. So,
Wow.
what do you do?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and so yeah, anyway, my thing is like I don't what I want to do is say, like, I'm not saying every company is even like this. Like that idea that you're either one of those two things, that's not actually real life often anyways. Like a lot of these companies, they work cooperatively. They work together quite often to figure out how all of them can make money. If you've ever seen how the heads of these companies, they kind of like they know each other. They know each other. They're usually friends with each other. Someone at this company will have their kid as a VP at the competitor. I
Hmm.
mean,
Look,
that's more
the
like how businesses actually operate. They work together. I'm not going to make this about politics, but especially if you look at how they back certain programs or how the same kinds of people that own these different companies will work together to back things politically, economically, all of those things. They work together more often than they do fight amongst each other.
Well,
So,
the thing about this that really it's like the thing that grinds my gears when I hear somebody say certain things is when people like to compare human beings to like animals, and it's like, okay, look at like just the chair that I'm in right now. Like I'm not sponsored by these people, but the chair that I'm in, like a tiger can't make that. You know, like a gazelle can't make a computer. Like, we're talking about two completely different
Yeah.
things. We've created entire societies, nations full of people who are basically working together to try and do something, whatever that might be. And you're trying to say that the only way to be is as if you're animals in a prairie or whatever. And it's like, that's like one of the most false comparisons I can think of. And,
Right.
the concept that you should run like businesses, like regardless of what you think about how they should be run, government run or socialist or whatever, it doesn't matter. The idea about these different businesses is that these are the things that like are like embedded in our society. And if we have like the ideology that you're going to be just straight up attacking people, and either you're going to be prey or you're going to be the person that's preying on other people, what sort of idea is that going to plant in people's mind
Hmm.
about how they should be and how they should live, and how is that going to impact how we live day to day and our like work and what we do?
Yeah, it's
So
it's a very aggressive way to do it, and the way that I see it taught a lot is that that's the right way to do it. Like you got to be aggressive. You have to you want to put the other guy out of business. That's often what I hear, and the
why
case
not
is
call up the other business and be like, hey, why don't we work together, and we can actually, instead of fighting each other for this, find out what our strengths and our weaknesses are and work together to resolve those and make our business larger together.
right.
It's not necessarily an acquisition, it would be merging the thing together, but more of a collective instead of one being in control of the other.
Yeah, instead of a hostile takeover where you got one guy trying to do whatever they can to force the other company to bend to their will.
Right.
Usually that's how an acquisition is someone will come in with more money than you got, go to the owner and say, "Hey, I'll give you $1 million cash buy your company." Then basically they just own it versus having, groups of people kind of work together to do things. We talked about this was offline, but I wanted to bring it up here that when you have a construction company, it may be that the construction company starts with just, okay, um, I have the know-how on how to make sure that everything comes together. So I know how they're built. I know all the rules. I know how to make sure they're all done right. And then I work with these other contractor companies that are basically vendors of services, and we work together to build a bunch of houses, right? So in that case, who's the wolf and who's the sheep in that situation? There is none of those things. There are none. So when someone keeps telling you that in business you're only one of these things, it's BS. It's not true because most companies do a bunch of different things. And depending on what your moral, I guess your moral or your ethical, which side of the fence you're on some things can determine how you're going to work with people. But it's usually the case where there's a lot of cooperation. There's a lot of dealing with each other to try to find something that's mutually beneficial. And then there are those people who are jerks that you're going to have to deal with, unfortunately, that think that uh, business is always just about those things. How can who was it? There's a famous quote of VFX supervisor who said, I haven't done my job until a VFX vendor has gone out of business. The idea was that they could squeeze a company so hard that it would cause them to go bankrupt. That was their measure of success. I mean, you are going to have people like that, but it doesn't mean everyone's like that. Weta Digital is awesome. The way that they do business and the way that they treat their employees and all that, they have a great way of treating people
They're
by
also in New
comparison.
Zealand. But yeah, like I mean, for me it's like, unless you're talking about a Disney film or something like that, animals aren't gonna, like, you can't really compare the two because they don't run businesses.
Right.
Human beings do. And the idea that they're the same, or that you should read a thing on war or something else that's like completely different. It's like, oh, but it's the concept. It's like, yeah, the concept is killing people. Like, you're talking about taking
Yeah,
something that's
your
made to
cons.
talking about killing people and putting that into the business. Like, should that be there? That's the question.
Why would you
So
want
it's
to
like,
live your life like that? I guess I don't understand that part of it. Like, why? Because I mean, someone might say, well, that's I'm told this a lot. Well, that's human nature. I'm like, no, that's not human nature. That's nature you're talking about. You're talking
yeah,
about you're trying to attribute the things that an animal does to human beings, and we're totally different than that. Like, I always this is s- my brain starts to hurt, and I get frustrated when I try to talk to people about it because I feel like they're completely misunderstanding what human beings even are.
yeah. Well, look, there are people like that in business,
Yes.
right? Who are going to be sharks, and they may be very wealthy and stuff like that, but people may hate them because of how they got there. Not that they're jealous or anything, which is generally what's talked about, but maybe they had to lie, cheat, and steal. And that's a lot of stuff that people think is immoral. Just like in regular life, are there people who murder other people? Yes, but we would
Should
look
we
at
make
that
that the
like
norm? Like,
that's not a good thing. You should not be a predator in society preying on other people. So why is that acceptable in a business setting, and why is that point of view the acceptable, thing? So I think it's more
yeah.
a question on, where you kind of lie in that spectrum. It's a very cynical and very nihilistic way of looking at things if that's the way that you live your life and want to do business, but you know,
Well, I mean,
not for me.
I think that it's pretty I think that it speaks to how low you think humans are. It's like, to me, I wouldn't be surprised if the same people who think that way also believe that the pyramids were not made by human beings. They had to be made by aliens because human beings could never create such a thing.
Right.
I mean, it's like, how could human beings ever have figured out that when you stack rocks on each other or blocks on each other that they naturally can get stronger as they go up like this in the same shape?
Even though that even a kid understands that when they pour sand into a pile, that the natural shape it
The
makes is
natural shape
similar
is
to a
is like
pyramid,
a
but
pyramid. It's
whatever.
like people could figure it out. People if people could figure out how to make a battery, if human beings were able to figure out how to create a thing that has chemicals that make an explosion so big it destroys an entire town and vaporizes human beings, they could figure out how to stack rocks on each other. They could figure that out. Like, it's not insane to think that it's possible. Um, and the same thing with like human beings in business. Human beings are able to work together in cooperation to make a living and make their world better. I mean, without treating each other like they're animals. It's totally
Right.
possible. It just depends on how to me, it just depends on how you really decide to view things. Obviously, you and I, DJ, we kind of study a lot of philosophy. That's why we talk about this on this channel.
Philosophy, economics, and politics.
Yeah, we study a lot of that, and it's kind of why, like, we have a lot of, like, when we come on, we talk a lot about this stuff because we think it's important that if you're viewing this channel or you're watching DJ's channel, that you understand this. It's all actually, like, those things are very integral into our society. Um, you know, and if you're not thinking about it, if somebody who knows even a little bit about philosophy starts talking to you and saying, "Oh, well, Sun Tzu, Art of War, they did an end around, they ambushed them. It's like, no, or they just made a thing. They made a thing that they thought would sell, and they didn't think about how they're going to ruin another company. They just created a thing, right? That could totally be what happened. Or the case of the animalistic thing. Oh, well, this company, they I mean, they just got eaten alive because they weren't being enough of a wolf, because you only got one of those two things. It's like, or the people who ran the company just like ran out of ideas.
Yeah,
It
I
could
mean,
be
there's
it
all
could be
kinds of.
that they just ran
uh,
out of ideas.
Well, here's one thing and it's something going on right now that's worth reading about if you're interested in tech. Like, Intel's getting their butt kicked by AMD in a lot of ways right now. Not necessarily in sales because Intel's they're the big company, but AMD's processors, they're down to 7 nanometer plus that they're coming out with. Either already some of them this year and next year, and Intel isn't planning on going to 7 nanometer in forever, like in the tech world. It's taking forever for them to do it. And it's because they're so big, they can't convert over because they can't get the size wafers and stuff they need to like move over because they're too big to have these orders.
Wow.
And they're getting bought out by all these other companies, like ones that are making stuff for GPUs and ones that are doing it for the CPUs for AMD and all this other stuff. So they're kind of getting priced out and beat out in certain markets because they're too big to handle the sort of thing that's being asked of them.
Mm.
And like you look at the pricing and it was like, I mean, I don't know the exact things, but like, the biggest chip that you could get for like a home computer sort of thing that was on a server, like basically like a server chip, something like 18 cores or 20 cores or something like that. And it would be like thousands of dollars. And then they come out with like AMD comes out with the new stuff. It's like there's a 64 core, 128 thread for like $4,000. That's like nobody ever heard of anything like that being available for regular desktops. And it's like they're just getting chewed alive. But
Well, it's
the thing
because
is, it's
they read Art of War and they
no,
figured out that you have to
there's
know the enemy to beat the enemy,
it
s- right?
it's the circumstances. It's just the circumstances, and they can't move the ship. They can't steer. And regardless of how, they have all these researches and all that stuff, they just can't steer in that way because maybe it's that they're too big. Or maybe they rested on their laurels. Or maybe they say, you know what, who gives a crap? We still have a ton of the sales. We have the
Mm.
lion's share of all of the sales. And what are they going to do? They can't really touch us. Who knows what is going on there? But
Well,
it's just something interesting to see because you can sort of see like in the sales, you can see AMD starts popping up. Oh, they're getting bigger. Oh, they're getting bigger. Oh man, they have a new thing that's like, two times the processing power of like the equivalent price of an Intel chip. So
yeah,
it's interesting.
I just to kind of bring it around to, video production side too. The same kind of thing happens when people talk about like different camera companies. We're gonna do another 5 minutes. We're a little bit over, but we'll just finish this out. In camera companies, someone will say, "Oh, well, Canon's getting their butt kicked because this company did this and this company made that thing, and oh, their camera sales are going down." And I was like, well, Canon's a huge company. They make all kinds of stuff. It's very possible that the smart thing to do is just to kind of give up on that race because you got all this other stuff you're selling. I mean, there could be a hundred things that any company's doing that would give them reason to not go into putting a bunch of money and time and research into developing new products in one particular line because you're not looking. I remember when I was doing a science video, they had a Leica slide thing. And then over at the microscope bench, they had Carl Zeiss lenses on the microscopes. So, those items sell way more as far as like how much money you get per product and the amount of return you get for investing in the research that goes into making those things. Dude, they make a lot of money on science equipment. A lot more money on that probably than cameras. And for like photography lenses, a
They got
field
money.
that's basically dying because cell phones. So, it's just, I guess I just wanted to talk about this because it does kind of bother me when I have to uh, try. I keep my ear to the ground on this kind of world, and when I hear people kind of talk about things that way, and I think it kind of also, I guess the other reason why I wanted to talk about this is because I think it feeds into another part of what artists do to each other, which is when someone posts something, say it's on like I just started getting on the Facebook for the Tony Day channel, and going into the different forums, and somebody will say, "Hey, I made this thing. Can you give me some feedback?" And it's like jerk remark, jerk
Yeah.
remark, jerk remark. And all I can think of in my mind is this person thinks that this is how you are supposed to
Yeah.
make your work stand out. You make them feel so bad about themselves that they quit because that's less competition for you.
Yeah.
That way, you don't have to worry about them taking your work.
Hmm. It might be that.
Gatekeepers will keep people out as much as they can. Often it's for their own personal reasons by
Yeah.
saying things like that.
I mean, it could be that, but it could also be like with certain fields, there's an air of like superiority or something like that. Like one of the worst that I've experienced in my life are guitar players. Even if they're not great, a lot of them are jerks because I don't know why. Like,
Mm.
you're playing something bad or wrong, so they're going to show you up and play it better. And it's like nobody asked you for that, and
Well, I do
it's a
wonder if
weird it's a weird thing when you start to see like somebody puts up an art piece that they made and somebody craps all over it. And it's like, well,
well, what's
why?
it to
Like
you?
a
What's it
critique?
to you if you don't say anything?
Yeah,
If you want to critique someone else's art, like there's a big difference. By the way, I'm not saying not to give constructive criticism. If somebody's
right.
asking you for constructive criticism, that does not give you full
It doesn't give you carte
permission.
blanche
It
to basically
to
crap all
basically
over somebody's thing.
shit all over what they just did.
Yeah,
is a lot of times when I see that, it usually isn't someone who's been doing this for very long. It's like someone getting into it. Maybe they just want to do some fun videos and they want some help. Often it's just that they want a little bit of help. They want to make their art, they want to make their thing, and they want a little bit of help. If you don't want to give them help, don't be a jerk about it. Just say
it's also like
nothing.
that in a lot of forums where people are asking for help. That's why I really like the Blender community. Is one of the best communities out there. A lot of people are trying to help each other and a
Uh-huh.
lot of like open source stuff. But when you start going into some of the other realms with other programs, like especially Adobe, like on a lot of forums, it's like somebody asking like, "Hey, can somebody help me with this issue?" And then somebody goes like, "Well, it's one of the like first things you learn when you do that." It's like nobody asked you for that. They were just asking for help. And
Yeah.
instead of giving help, you're being rude and either don't say anything or whatever. But a lot of people, they don't even address the issue. They just
Mhm.
they want to show off how much they know about something that's irrelevant to the thread post. So
Yeah, that's
anyway,
why I say it's kind of like that mentality that people have. They have this mentality that that's how you're supposed to act. Like the way that
yeah,
you show people that you know something is by being a jerk about it. I don't agree with that. That's how I know that you probably don't actually work with human beings in your field.
yeah,
Because if you respond that way to let's say you're a marketing director and you respond like an asshole to your artist doing your work, you know what they're going to do? They'll
and
probably intentionally make it look bad.
sit on their hands. They'll make it take longer,
They'll make
and
you
they'll
pay
be like,
more.
"Oh, I
They'll,
don't know what happened."
oh shoot, it's not done on time.
Yeah, somebody's a
Oops,
jerk to me. It's going to take
oops.
longer.
Yeah.
It will
So
take longer, and it will be more expensive next time around.
yeah, it just you know so that's why I wanted to kind of end with this. Like the big thing for me to end with it, like I try to do a lot, is to try to foster um, very respectful treatment of each other so that we don't have these situations. Like you don't have to, as an artist, like you don't have to see yourself as an isolated individual in a sea of a bunch of people trying to get you. Okay, we could make it where we're all trying to work together. You
Yeah,
know, like we could do that if we wanted to. We could have a community where you didn't have to look over your shoulder all the time to see where you're gonna get your food or whatever. Like we could have that kind of community if we really wanted to have it. Same thing with online when I see people say, "Oh well, if you can't take a few mean comments on Facebook, then you need to get out of this industry." How about this? How about we change the way we communicate with each other so we don't make people feel like crap just for posting something that they worked on? We could do that also. Like instead of just assume that it's human nature to act this way. It's not.
yeah,
It's not. If it was such human nature for us to act this way, then it would make us feel good. We'd
yeah.
get like a boost of, like the person that it was happening to would get that boost of endorphins or whatever. But we don't like that.
I have a
Last
couple
last
times.
comments, and then we're
Yeah,
gonna sign out.
I have a couple times in my life offered help to people who say that they want to learn CGI and all that stuff without expecting anything in return. And that's one of the reasons why I started my own YouTube channel, is because I want to share with people how to make stuff, at least the way that I understand it, so that if this is their passion, this is what they want to do, they get all the help they need. And I've had a couple people go like, "Why are you doing this? Like, why do you do this? Like, why are you offering this time to me?" And I'm like, "Well, I didn't have it when I was young. I didn't have anybody really helping to mentor me and show me how to do things and
Mm,
helping me out with the technology, which can be very frustrating at times." And now I'm where I am because I had other people that I went to online who helped to show me. And if I can help them through email or, doing one-on-ones like this or something like that, or even the videos that I have on YouTube, I want to do that because I want to help grow the community and I
yeah.
don't really expect anything in return. So,
Yeah. The same thing is with this channel. Like, I think that both of us are trying to do the same thing where, like, I started doing this one as a way of giving back because I had learned to do a bunch of things, like in Resolve, for example, by going on the forums and using YouTube and all that. So I wanted to help kind of foster that. Now with it kind of growing, it costs more money to do it than originally. So, it's different than just taking like 10 minutes to do a screen capture and do whatever. Doing this kind of thing does take more time and money. So the $2 I get per video I post helps out a little bit on that. But that's all I'm trying to do too. Like I just want to try to make this community better if I can. So I hope you guys are all with us on that. um,
looks like everybody's heading out. So,
yeah, so we're going to sign out. Uh,
thanks a lot, guys.
so this was DJ Tutorials hanging out with us this time. I hope that
Yep.
you enjoyed this, and we will see you, or I will see you next week. Have a good weekend.